EscapeGoat Podcast, a podcast series featuring the discussion of many different topics, flaws and all, based on personal whims and fascinations. Hosted by me, David Fagiani, and several different guests. Hello, David here, and welcome to the 5th anniversary special episodes of the EscapeGoat Podcast. It's 5 years since I've been doing this. I started putting out episodes in late March 2020 as the world was changing, and I've been putting out episodes, in sort of seasons, of them, series of them for years now, and it's been amazing. It's been fascinating, and it's been really, really fun, and I've really enjoyed it. It's carried me through many changing, evolving, often quite challenging periods of my life. It's enhanced and maintained a lot of friendships with people I met in real life years ago. It's helped me keep in touch with them. I guess I've gone from being 34 to 39 in this period. It's a period of your life which is often quite tricky about staying in touch with people, and it's really helped with that through many ups and downs for me and for everyone involved in recording it. It's been not only an opportunity to stay in touch and deepen friendships with real life friends, it's been a real fanboy's dream of getting to record stuff with and have chats with, and I guess create online friendships, and in some cases in real life friendships with people that I'd been listening to their podcast for years. And you can kind of tell, the thrill that I've had in having some of those conversations and talking to some of those people, because it's been a real bit of wish fulfillment for me. And I've just, honestly, whatever else has been going on in my life at various points, it's whenever I get the chance to do these, whenever I get to put these out, whenever I get to work on them, whenever I get to edit them. I really like editing. That's the thing I do, and I it's a new skill I've learned, and thanks to people who've helped me learn that as well at the beginning of the podcast. It's just been really fun promoting it, talking about it, talking on the shows, and I think almost every one of them, has just been something that I'm really proud of, and where I'm not proud of them, it's only because maybe the production was a bit rushed, or I didn't have time to polish them, but wanted to get them out, and I just think they're all fantastic little artifacts, and the show's not really about anything. It's just about things I like. It's about things I want to talk to people about. It's about podcasts I want to exist in the world. I think we've recorded some really good ones that are hopefully fun to stumble across on the internet, and things that weren't really covered yet. Those are amongst the ones I'm most pleased about. And I've loved it. So I wanted to mark it, and this is a special episode, or rather it's the first part of a series of special episodes talking to people most about their favourite TV shows. I'm trying to feature a range of people across the history of the EscapeGoat Podcast, guests from all across the eras of it, and people who are keen to be on it, and they'll be coming out over the next few weeks, so I'll see exactly how many I've got in the can by then, but there'll be certainly this and some other parts, so I really hope you enjoy them. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been on the show, everyone who's listened to the show, everyone who has promoted the show and spread it. This hasn't made me a lick of profit, and I don't think it ever will. It's not that kind of show, but it's a real labour of love, and I've loved doing it. So happy 5th birthday to the EscapeGoat Podcast, happy birthday to the goat, and hope you enjoy this episode.
No good with words. Don't use them much myself. But I want to thank you all for being here and thinking so much of me. As far as I see it, you people have been given the shortest end of the stick ever been offered a human soul in this crap hill-verse. But you took that end. And you took it. And that's, well, I guess that's something.
Wow. That didn't sound half bad. I'm shocked my own self.
Hi, Nannina, welcome.
Hello. How are
Hello.
you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm really glad you've been able to join for this celebration. It's great to have, all the kind of gang back together and sort of doing things and contributing to this sort of strange compendium that I'm trying to put together. But I'm also really enjoying celebrating the 5 years that have gone by in doing this and having these cool chats. And you became a real sort of backbone stalwart of that quite early on, and it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you over the years.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't miss your fifth birthday for the world.
Yeah, and that sounds pretty strange. And that's where we're at with it. I I think I don't know how you feel, but I was thinking about this and I was thinking that maybe you could sort of group the people I've chatted to on the EscapeGoat podcast into at least two groups, like two main groups, and they are essentially kind of real life friends who I've then got onto this and we've like talked to either once or several times like yourself, and we've kind of like maintained or deepened our friendship through it. And then there's like people that I kind of have known. Maybe it's like my first verbal conversation with them is actually doing the show. Maybe people who have listened to their podcast that they've done. And I was thinking, obviously you fall into the former category. You're a real world friend who I knew at university and got to know afterwards, and have been doing this with for quite a while now. But I think probably of everyone that I've done the show with, yours has probably been, and it's partly because we live quite far away, but it's also
Mm.
it's been the one that's probably most deepened in existing friendship. I feel like we've actually become substantially better friends and know each other quite a lot better through doing this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that that was part of the appeal of joining you on this. So we live so far away from each other, just getting the chance to have geeky conversations, which we used to do when we were at uni together. And yeah, I'd do it if I weren't being recorded.
Yeah,
And I
no,
have.
yeah, you have, yeah, I know, I appreciate that, and it's just been a lot of fun, is what I wanted to convey, because I think
Yeah.
we've talked a lot about different movies, and it's been really good to sort of well, thank you firstly for following me down a lot of the rabbit holes of my own obsessions, and then I enjoyed getting to extremely belatedly return the favor and talk to you about a couple of movies last year, I guess in 2024, when we talked about The Hitchhiker and Point Break, both of which were educations.
And there have been mutual rabbit holes too.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
yeah.
Absolutely, very much so. Not all of them involving Rod Taylor, but a comical percentage still involving Rod Taylor. Did I catch recently on social media that you were doing a screening of The Hitchhiker locally?
Yes. I have been doing a film club at the local library. So 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we did a screening of The Hitchhiker, which was a lot of fun because no one that came had seen it, and people seemed to really enjoy it because it's a great film. But I did listen to our podcast again just to get a little bit of a refresher because I had done a bit of research before our podcast, and I did less research in front of the screening. So I was like, okay, need to remember the things that I used to know. Um,
Yes, it's a terrible feeling when you first catch yourself listening back to your own voice on Spotify, isn't it? I'm obviously well past that now. So that's just a routine thing in terms of sorting through these and working out what I said. But it does slightly hit your it makes you ego check slightly, doesn't
one always sounds different than one thinks.
it? Yeah. Well, you'll be glad to know there's now a statue to you at Scapegoat headquarters
In the town square.
in the town square, indeed.
But is there a song?
I was right. So I'll talk about what we'll talk about in a second. But I'd love that you've got me to watch an episode of television that involves a country song. Nicely
Folk,
done.
folk, more than country, I
More
would
of a
say.
folk ballad, yeah. I guess. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean
folk, yeah.
that shows you how in at the deep end I am here in terms of discussing this. But I'll mention what we're talking about because you've I gave you the choice of anything to talk about. And am I right in saying that you're feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but you're kind of not a huge television person, right?
I'm not a huge television person. I enjoy a certain number of TV shows. I think that TV can be great. In terms of sort of like a philosophical argument about TV, can something really be considered a great work of art if there are like three or four great seasons and then it kind of peters off and then it never has an ending or something like that. Things like that happen with TV shows all the time. And it's interesting when you want to look at things as a whole. Television is very much about individual episodes building into seasons, building into a show. And a lot of shows can clear the first hurdle. Some shows can clear the second hurdle. Very few shows can clear the third. And the show that we're talking about actually only got one season.
Yeah.
Which means, in a way, it's kind of perfect, but it's also, well, it did get a movie as well. So it did get a little bit of a conclusion, but it's an interesting question of how to view television as an art form.
No, it certainly is, and I
Yeah.
guess all kind of audiovisual entertainment being a collaborative medium, or most of it being a
Mm,
collaborative medium, but television is that over time, essentially, isn't it? That's the kind of
yeah.
it's one of the big differences with it in film. And you're right, it has to maintain streaks. And what we're talking about tonight is a very famous show, but like kind of like the most for our people of our demographic, particularly like an age, like kind of the most famously successful failed show, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
It was a cult show that kind of that, I mean, on mainstream network TV, but a cult then built a cult and has definitely furthered the career of its already famous and successful creator, who then went in some other directions and became even more known in various ways. But yeah, it's Firefly. I don't know why I'm burying the lead so much. It's
Yeah.
Firefly, and I think that probably a lot of people listening to this will know it, or at least will have heard of it. It's the sci-fi TV show from Joss Whedon,
Space Western.
space western thing, that I saw. I don't know about you. I saw it after university. I think I'm right in saying maybe a couple episodes at university. I think I actually saw. I'm sure I've heard other people say this. I think I didn't see it at the cinema, but I think I might have seen Serenity before I'd seen quite a lot of the show. That is Serenity, the spin-off movie. So I kind of saw it all out of order, but by the end of the noughties, I'd caught up with it basically. How about you?
So I definitely saw Serenity first. It actually was Joe and my first date. And Joe actually a couple of years ago for Christmas gave me he bought one of Kaylee's costumes, just a shirt. So we have a framed prop from Serenity in our house. At first I was like, why am I being given a pink tube top? But then I saw the certificate and I'm like, oh, this makes much more sense. But so Serenity has important place in my heart, both personally and just as a film. And Joe and I loved that film so much. And then we realized that there was a TV show. We went to see it just as a well-reviewed sci-fi film, new
Mm.
sci-fi film that had sort of Star Wars-esque qualities to it. And also starred Chiwetel Ejiofor as the villain, and he's
Yeah,
one of my all-time favorite actors. So
yeah, he's the baddie in
I,
this. It's an idea. I mean, that certainly would have been the first time I'd heard of him.
I had seen him a few years earlier in Dirty Pretty Things, so I was already aware of his work and was excited to see him in Serenity. And so then after that, Joe and I watched Firefly together, downloading the episodes off of iTunes, actually, which means that we didn't watch them all in exactly the right order because they did put the pilot first, which did air last. But the unaired episodes they tacked on at the end. So it ended on Heart of Gold, which isn't actually a very good ending point. It's kind of confusing. So, really enjoyed Firefly, but was a little bit confused as to why the episodes were in the particular order they were in, and then learned more about the process of how it was made, how it was canceled, how they never aired the pilot. They started with the second episode, Bushwhacked. No, Train Job, sorry. And yeah, it was never really given a chance for a show that the studio must have spent quite a bit of money on. It's kind of funny that they really kept on moving around its time slot. people couldn't really build up a following for it, and then canceled it before it had even run its course.
Yeah, they're often quite baffling, these network decisions, aren't they? And I think the more I read about things like this, the more often I realize it's just, one executive's on the way in, one executive's on the way out, that kind of stuff, But it is, with Joss Whedon already then being a hot property, particularly in terms of Buffy. Were you a Buffy fan at all?
I saw Buffy after I saw Firefly,
Ah,
by several years. So now I'm a huge Buffy fan. Um, Buffy and Firefly are two of my all-time favorite TV shows, but it took me a while to see Buffy.
mm. But as part of these recordings, I've been doing a little bit of Buffy rewatching. I won't spoil what that's about, but it's interesting that I've sort of dipped into Whedon last week and then today in watching your pick,
Mm.
episode 7, Jaynestown. I've kind of dipped back in. Jaynestown aired on the 18th of October 2002. It's about halfway through the show, as it turned out, when they sort of set up the premise, they've set up the characters. Just very briefly, why did you pick Jaynestown?
Because it's my favorite episode. Um, I really, I often enjoy the episodes, and this might be in general with television, that forward character rather than necessarily plot. And I just find Jamestown very enjoyable. It's very funny. It takes some of the Western elements and the idea of heroism and kind of tries to upend it a little bit, put a little spin on it. I think it has some fun things to say about the various characters while also just being well written and well directed. It also just coincidentally happens to be the only episode of Firefly that was directed by a woman. Um, there
You snuck that
were,
in. I love it.
yeah, there were a few that were written by women, and women were definitely in the writing room and all of that. But Janestown is the only one. It was Marita Grabnik, who directed it.
That's entertaining,
And
particularly for one that's perhaps even more about sort of male braggadocio and pomposity than the other
yeah,
episodes.
but also undermining that too.
Oh, very
So
much so. And I think it's
yeah,
actually it's a very interesting episode. I think when you come to things that Joss Whedon may or well maybe partly deliberately trying to say with the show and this episode, but also things that underlie Firefly that might not be deliberate or might not be conscious or meant to be commented on. And I think we could get into some of that. I think I asked you briefly before we started this, didn't I? I asked you yesterday whether you'd ever seen Alien Resurrection.
which I haven't, though I was offered the opportunity to recently.
Yes, yes.
Um,
And you knew I was asking. I saw Alien Resurrection on a plane with my brother when I was about 12. This is like, when it just was quite new. And it was kind of the first new Alien film that came along, and we were already massive obsessives, And I think particularly for my younger brother, seeing Alien Resurrection, he must have been like 9 or something, must have been quite an extreme experience. It's quite gory. But the reason I'm mentioning it, as a lot of people know, is that Joss Whedon ended up like I think at least mostly writing that movie paired with Jean-Pierre Jeunet's direction, and it's an odd match. But an Alien Resurrection, spoilers, isn't great really overall. I'd say, although it's kind of built, it's one of those movies that's like building up more of a cult now. It's kind of like people are sort of more coming out of the woodwork as Alien Resurrection fans. Can't really say I'm amongst them yet, but obviously it's an Alien film, so I'll like bits of it. But um, the crew that you'll know there's a ship called the Betty in Alien Resurrection. It's sort of motley crew of essentially space pirates come aboard the sort of main sort of Federation ship or whatever they're calling it in that, and they are definitely a sketch for the Firefly cast. Like you can really see it. Like there's the Winona Ryder figure, for example, plays a character who you could see as a sort of cross between Kaylee and River. I'd say in some ways she's
mhm.
sort of the naive, young girl on the ship, but she's also got a sort of dark past and hidden powers and stuff like that. There's a couple on the ship who you can I can't even remember all the names on Firefly, but they have clear analogs. There's a sort of Mal like captain. It's all a bit jumbled up, but Ron Perlman plays a character called Jonah in that, who's a thuggish brute, basically quite an unpleasant man, really, and with as fitting with the harder edge of Alien Resurrection in general. But he's not a very nice character, but he is quite an amusing character, and they give him a lot of quips and stuff like that. And he's clearly Jane, or
Yeah.
Jane is him. Jane is the more kind of prime time ready, kind of slightly more polished, lovable version of Jonah. and that's why I was kind of interested to set that tone because you've done this, and for people who don't know the plot of Jaynestown, the crew of the Serenity get to this planet where they roll into town basically. Obviously, as you say, it's like a neo-western. It's all about kind of rolling into these like fringe towns and places that on the frontier of this solar system. And Jane has been there before, and gradually and kind of comically, you realize that there's a statue of him in the town square, and that he is kind of worshipped as a folk hero by the locals, which is a great conceit, isn't it?
It is, especially because Jane is the least heroic character of the crew. I mean, he's a good fighter and will throw himself into any situation, but he doesn't do it for lofty purposes.
And he's been shown just this episode to be violent, selfish, and thoughtless, right?
Yeah.
Trashing. Is it Simon the doctor? Trashing his office basically.
Yeah, you're like a trained ape without the training.
Yeah, that's a Whedon line. There's a few in this.
But I think that one thing that Whedon has always excelled in is showing dynamics between people and having a good core cast to bounce off of each other. And that's one of the great strengths of Buffy. It's basically the premise of Firefly, like having these groups of friends fulfilling different roles, ensemble casts. And his later work within Marvel was to create the Avengers version of bringing together everyone and
to make that work, really, to make that gel from the disparate parts that built it up. Yeah.
And I think that that's probably why he was chosen for that job. So in terms of both Buffy and Firefly, the appeal of the show is in the dynamics between the characters. And also the high concept premises are a lot of fun as well.
Yes, I want to get back to the premise with you actually, because that at the end we can talk a bit about that, because I think that's again, I was hinting that Jaynestown maybe like saying some things deliberately and some things accidentally. Talking about River first, because she's kind of the B plot. I suppose Inara has a B plot as well. They're maybe joint B plots. They're separate from River's on the ship and Inara's off on her little sort of side quest basically. River's interesting because, as I say, I rewatched some Buffy recently, and she is this kind of mystery, powerful character. There's stuff going on with her, and she's a very sort of, I guess you'd say, touched character. Like she's very sort of distant mentally, and she's got an odd manner about her, and she's quite threatening and quite up and down. Mercurial, I suppose, is what she is. But I really like the scene where she's talking to Book, right, about his book, about the good book, and she's basically re-engineering the Bible. I wondered what your thoughts were about that scene.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting thing when she says that it's full of contradictions, and I'm like, well, actually, that's kind of the point. I've always enjoyed the contradictions within the Bible, because I feel like anything that just has one answer for everything can't possibly be balanced or true.
Very Walt Whitman of you.
Yeah, Walt Whitman was great. But I kind of wanted Shepherd Book to bring up that aspect of the Bible, and not just say that, well, it's about faith, which it is, but
he ends up saying he ends up sounding more like he's saying, yeah, it's nonsense, but you should believe it anyway, really, because it's useful, and like he could actually go a bit more into that.
Yeah, the B plot between River and Shepherd Book is interesting also in terms of looking at Book's character as well, because he's a bit of a mystery, and how he has ended up as a shepherd and where his faith lies, because he's a devout man, but he has a mysterious past, and he is more powerful than you would expect.
Yes, he's also a bit Giles, of course.
Yeah. And we never like a lot of things get wrapped up in the movie Serenity, but books remains a bit of a mystery, a bit of an enigma. One
Mm.
thing that I have to say about River at this point in the show, we don't know that she's powerful, which is hard to remember, especially if you see Serenity first.
Yeah, where she's basically like a superhero by that point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but for most of Firefly, she is pretty debilitatedly helpless and sometimes has flashes of lucidity, but it takes Simon taking his time to try to get her better before there's a moment where you can see the fact that she is not only a graceful, crazy girl, but also an incredibly powerful fighter.
One thing I thought was interesting about Simon and River, just my sort of retaste of them in this, was that, and again, having watched Buffy recently, was they seem most like the characters who could recently have attended like a Californian high school. You know,
Mm.
they see, because they're from civilization, essentially, because they're from like the inner system or whatever you call it in this. You know, they're civilized. He's. I was thinking of the phrase "the dude" as well. You know, like he's later on when they're in the bar. He plays that role of the dude, isn't he? He might as well be Bob Hope, you know. Like he's kind of his. The whole joke is he's not very good at this. You know?
Yeah.
He's not built for this territory, and she's more enigmatic and more damaged, you know. But she also is from that. I actually thought, you know, when Book's talking to her and she's getting frustrated, I actually thought she was about to say bored now, you know, like it was that kind of, and because you know, because she's a very young female actress as well, you know, like she's got that Buffy vibe to her, and you know. But Simon feels like that too. Simon feels like he's kind of from that world in a way that the other characters, for all their weaknesses, don't quite. You know?
And I think that the characters are very different, but what can kind of help one think of Simon in that world is that his actor looks quite a lot like Xander.
Yeah, he does. He really does.
Whedon has types, definitely,
Yeah.
and both male and female.
He also has some
And
amazingly named actresses. Like I was thinking, are there two more unusually cool named actresses in a show than Summer Glau and Jules State?
yeah,
That's a really odd combination. Yeah, I mean Summer Glau, yeah, that also looks like someone who could be in Buffy. And I believe was on Angel, possibly. I lose track of what everyone's in.
yes.
But she, you know, I know she went on to do Dollhouse and things like that as well. You know, it's an interesting cast. Actually, one thing I really like about the sort of vibe of Firefly is I quite like shows where there's a sort of that style of dialogue where people talk in a way that they don't quite talk in any other TV show, and I think this isn't the deep end of that. Like for instance, Deadwood, and you know that's on the Western track. That's a very stylized form of poetic cod Western dialogue, which this isn't even going for. You know, this is going for like the sort of five, where or Deadwood's like the 10 on that scale. You know, but like you get in most sort of evidently with Mal. I think the way Mal speaks.
Mm,
It has a sort of circuitous Western twang to it, doesn't it? And the way he
rhythm.
gets around to talking about things, yeah, and it's quite, it's in a quite a sort of or shucks kind of like he does sound like he's kind of like in Wagon Train or something, doesn't he? Like he sounds like a sort of 50s Western star.
Yeah, and I think that it's a difficult thing to do right to create a sort of vernacular for your characters, but I think Firefly does it really effectively because you don't notice it in a intrusive way as you're watching, or at least I don't. And it's also fun them using the Chinese in order to swear, and get around some of the rules of television in that way. And yeah, it's an interesting world that is built and quite effectively built, I think.
I definitely, I'd agree with that. And
And
I was thinking
yeah.
actually that one thing about this episode and maybe Firefly in general is it's kind of it almost seems like a beginner's class in like how to write dialogue that is doing like one thing when it's meant to be doing another. Sort of like like it's almost like Whedon's very capable of doing that sort of dialogue, which isn't super complex, but is conveying something where the characters are talking at cross purposes. Is what I'm trying to say. I was a particular fan of the scene
Mm,
where Inara's talking to her sort of initiate, so to speak, about she hears that the Jaynestown plot is going down basically, and she thinks he's talking about Mal. and she starts almost like she's got
Of
the lasso of
course.
truth on her. She sort of basically starts talking about what she thinks about Mal and what admiration, well, yeah, mixed feelings she might have about Mal, but some admiration in there too. And then comically, it's like, no, we're talking about Jane. And then she's like, oh, okay,
Jane Cobb.
yeah, which is great. But that's
Yeah.
a fun scene, and I think I kind of I was going to go deep on like Inara's character and kind of her role in it, but I think I didn't come here to sort of talk about everything in Firefly that might be problematic or kind of odd to include because I mean the fact that she's a sex worker isn't it's not like that's problematic in itself to include. I was actually thinking of some of it in this some of the sort of bizarre Orientalism that comes with her job.
Yeah. And that is an aspect of Firefly that has been talked about because there is all of this, as I mentioned before, they use Chinese. There's a lot of Asian imagery, and it is a bit of perhaps a mistake that there is not an Asian cast member in a major role.
It's a strange flex,
So
isn't it? I've not heard
there's
Whedon say much about why he did that. I mean, I understand the
well,
concept here, and America and China have dominated and merged to an extent, yeah. But
yeah, and I think that that concept is an interesting one, especially in this Western genre, and also being able to take aspects. And I know that it's China and America, but it's not necessarily done in the most sensitive way. And so also taking aspects of like the samurai film, with which is sort of the Western genre of Japan, and there's been a lot of conversation between Westerns and samurai films over the decades. And so bringing in that element as well. I did hear that originally the character of Kaylee was supposed to be cast as an Asian actress, but in the end, they didn't go that route. So it, I think, is a very interesting element of Firefly and also quite a problematic one in how it was executed. I think that it could have been executed better, but it also does add to the texture of the world. And it's just a shame that they weren't able to make it actually representational,
yeah, I mean,
or
it's full it's
representative.
it's full of stuff you discussed back in 2002, but also that stuff that's more limited now. I mean, I think it's fondly done, and they're a group of friends and everything. But having a white woman be scared at a black guy's untethered afro hair. It's it's
Yeah,
it's it's a it's just a I mean that could happen and she's a weird character but it's like it just leaves you go huh, you know
yeah, that's never been my favorite part of this episode. Um,
yeah I mean the joke is
and
essentially a black guy's hair like that would look big, right? It's like yeah
yeah,
yes it would which is a strange
um,
flex, yeah.
but another aspect of Firefly that I think does get brought up a fair bit, but is stemming from the fact that it's a space western, and so from the ideas that are in the westerns of the sort of classic Hollywood era and even later is this idea of Mal and Zoe having fought in this civil war, basically, and the browncoats definitely being in many ways analogous to the Confederacy, the way the Confederacy has been used in American westerns and actually Italian westerns. And that, I mean, of course, in Firefly, it is removed from the sort of concept of slavery and the actual American Civil War. But a lot of westerns do end up being sort of Confederate apologia.
Hmm.
And there are moments in Firefly that make reference to like that they'll rise again and things
Yeah,
like that. So
yeah,
that is an element of Firefly.
I didn't think I was going to have to be the one to introduce you to that reading of Firefly. I imagined you'd come across that and thought
Yeah.
about that. I wanted to mention it specifically in terms of this episode, in terms of the statue thing, because
Mm,
it's
yeah.
really interesting because I was thinking it's fun. I read a cute anecdote about firstly I'd forgotten one of the Baldwins played Jane. Adam Baldwin plays Jane,
Yeah.
and I read a cute anecdote about him having at the end of the shoot he stole the head off the statue, like he like sawed the head off the statue and like took it with him, and then they had to do a reshoot, so they had to like tape the head back on or something. So there's like apparently there's one scene where you can see it's been taped on unconvincingly or something, but I presume he still has that head. I don't know, but like it's but that reminded me of The Simpsons. There's a well, early on, there's a plot where Bart steals the head of the statue in the town square, which is of Jebediah Springfield, who's the town founder. And several seasons later, there's an episode where Lisa, being the liberal conscience of the show, finds out that the historical Jebediah Springfield wasn't a very nice man. Basically, he was like a marauding pirate and was, exploitative and not a person to look up to. And it's all this thing about America coming to terms with its own heritage and the sort of statues you put up in the town square and who they actually might have been and all that sort of stuff. And I thought it was very interesting to fuse that. I didn't remember the statue, basically. I remembered the premise, but I didn't remember the statue. And I was like, it's interesting in a show that's kind
How
of,
could you forget the statue?
yeah, it's a bit weird, isn't it? Who knows what I was on in 2010? Um, it's interesting, though, isn't it, in a show that's playing around with ideas about the heroic defeated army and the Confederacy coding of them. However much of that Whedon specifically meant to, lay at the door of the historical Confederacy. Um, it's odd to then have this statue thing, isn't it? Because I know that's ebbed and flowed over the years, over the last few decades in American society. There's been individual incidents about controversies over specific statues. That's started to come up more in British society as well. You might have heard a few years ago there was a statue in Bristol which was removed and eventually ended up in the water to do with, and that was to do with the slave trade and to do with the legacy of that. But I'm sure there were examples of that around the turn of the century, around the early noughties, that were coming up because it's not a new issue in American culture. And I wonder what Whedon's trying to say there, because I was kind of thinking, what does this episode mean? Like, what's it trying to say? And at the end there, Mal and Jane, I mean, on a basic level, it's the comic thing of Jane goes into a zone where he's seen as heroic. He takes advantage of that. He plays the hero, and then he's revealed as not heroic, right? And there's that basic comic conceit. But then at the end, they have a pretty serious chat about it, and Mal's kind of talking about statues being things, and obviously this ties back to the Bible talk. Statues being what people need from you, and they're not the sort of people you put up statues to, meaning kind of us, basically. I think he basically means you, but also me.
Mm.
We don't necessarily deserve them, and I'm kind of like, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but do you think that's it's a bit odd, isn't it? Like, I mean, I get what the episode's about. I think it ties together, it seems quite nicely, I think, but like it's almost like what I mean, is this partly because they are hinting that Mal has done some pretty dark stuff? I don't know enough about the show to kind of know where it goes with that.
I mean, I think that Mal is a flawed hero. And I mean, he's literally a criminal. I think that the episode in general is really an exploration of the sort of fallacy of heroism, and that the imperfection of people and then putting them on pedestals, they're never going to live up to the pedestal they're put on. And of course, Jane is an absurd example of that because he's Jane, but the idea of turning people into heroes is always going to be a problem because people are complex and are never simply one thing or the other, that someone can drop a bunch of money into a area of enslaved people that they get to keep the money, and they think of it as a Robin Hood act. And also that can be true, and it can also be true that the person that did it by accident and also threw out his partner because they needed to lighten the ship in order to get away. So,
Yeah. No, it's
um,
interesting tying that Western thing back to
yeah.
Robin Hood, isn't it? Because I think obviously you meant to think of Robin Hood with the sort of giving to the poor stuff and that sort of heroic
Mm.
archetype. And it's kind of fascinating as well because I was thinking watching this, I was like, It's partly because I watched it on Disney Plus today, and it had a sort of I don't think you get this in all versions, but it had a sort of premise setting up kind of even before the opening theme credits. It had a sort of this is what's going on the show Firefly. This is the premise
Mm.
essentially, which made it feel very like a sort of 80s TV show. And I was like, well, it's funny because we grew up watching this in our teens and adolescence and 20s and on DVD box sets and stuff, but this actually is quite an older form of American show, really, isn't it? It is kind of the Incredible Hulk. It is kind of the A Team. It's something the A Team particularly, but it is that, and they call them Western tropes as well. But the heroes wandering from town to town. These are more self-interested heroes, but they are kind of they're I think from memory they do some good along the way, don't they? Mostly, and that's why
Yeah.
they're our protagonists. They manage to do good in this sort of amoral, dangerous world. I was actually quite shocked by Jane's violence. In the scene where he takes out his old partner because that's the
Mm.
reveal, and then the townspeople revealed that he's not so altruistic, and then he kills the guy, and it's all very entertainingly choreographed. But he throws a knife into him, and then after a bit of grappling, bashes his brains in, and it's actually kind of you see less
On
of
the
it because
statue.
I'd missed it. It was just on the statue. That's great. You see less of that explicitly than you would in Deadwood for obvious network TV reasons, but it's pretty brutal. It hits you.
Yeah, Firefly definitely was pushing the bounds of what could be shown on network TV. There are several episodes that are really sort of horror inflected, Bushwhacked being one, and War Stories, which involves quite brutal torture of two of our main characters. Uh, so. I think that Firefly is sort of one of these shows on the cusp between it was a network show, perhaps a little bit to its detriment since it was never really given the chance to thrive. And it had to work within those constraints, as we already talked about. Most of the swearing is confined to other languages, but there is a fair amount of violence in addition to a lot of lighthearted elements too, sort of melding them together.
Well, on a lighter note, before we finish, what do you think, as
Mm.
someone who owns one of her costumes, what do you think about Jules State as Kaylee? Like, is she a character that means a particular amount to you, and do you think she's well used here?
I mean, I enjoy Kaylee as a character quite a lot. Uh, Probably my second favorite episode is Shindig, which Kaylee is absolutely adorable in. I mean, one of the plot elements that sort of gets furthered in this episode is the relationship or lack thereof between Kaylee and Simon. And so their sort of B plot is mostly about how A, Simon just doesn't fit into this world, but he's kind of trying, and how the sort of miscommunications between them are each of them trying to express their feelings but not being really able to do so.
I like the way she's in one level, the sort of cutesy, almost like Captain's daughter type character of like, the sort of
Mm.
naive girl who's, being kind of looked after by the other characters and having this sort of sweet courtship with Simon and everything like that. There's a kind of there's a sort of again a sort of shucks kind of folksiness to it, isn't there? But then I also like the relative maturity of her and Mal's relationship in this one, where he's trying to get her to do something, and she basically in a coded language is like, "I'm trying to get laid here. Like, could you just read the room?" And he's like, "Oh, okay," and facilitates that and leaves. I was like,
Yeah.
that's quite sweet.
I think Kaylee sort of part of Kaylee's role, I mean, is keeping Firefly going and being the mechanic, but also as kind of this generally innocent character who is not a fighter and all of that. Often her role is to be sort of put in peril. And she's very capable in many ways, but um, also she's the sort of character that when she's put in peril, you really feel for her. And there are at various points elements of her being kind of a damsel in distress. But I think that the relationship and interaction between her and Mal is usually a pretty positive. Basically, everyone on the ship kind of wants to protect Kaylee, almost more than River, who also does have this vulnerability, but also is unusual, abnormal in some way, a bit of a mystery, and more abrasive, um,
Yeah,
less sort of quote unquote likable. Kaylee is incredibly likable as a character.
yeah.
Um,
No, I can see that. And I think you've probably already told me, but what would be, if you had one other Firefly episode to recommend, what would be your other episode?
um, well, it's hard to, I mean, the pilot is a fantastic pilot, introducing all of the characters in the world. And it is, I think, one of the best pilots out there. And it's like its own mini movie because or it's not even a mini movie, it's a feature length episode of TV.
And you mentioned
But
Shindig, and you mentioned, I think, Out of Gas. You were very tempted to talk to me about, weren't you?
yes, Out of Gas, I think, has a really interesting structure to it and is very well executed and gives some of the backstories of various characters while also being a really tense situation that you don't quite know how they're going to get out of. Um, and then also Ariel is just a really great sort of heist episode, and that one I think is a good combination of massively forwarding the plot, but also keeping an eye on the characters. And then in terms of sort of forwarding more character development than plot development, War Stories is quite harrowing, but also really well done, well executed, and I love the relationship between Zoe and Wash, the married couple. War Stories is really about their relationship, so that is a really good one. I
Yeah,
mean, in
Gina
general,
Torres is great.
yeah. In general, Firefly is a really interesting show and really well done, and it's a shame that it didn't get the chance to have more seasons and to develop, but also it didn't get the chance to go downhill. So,
Yeah.
and also I do absolutely love the movie Serenity. I think it is a great standalone film, and you don't necessarily even have to have watched or enjoyed Firefly to love Serenity.
And
So
although Firefly was cancelled via the Avengers, it eventually ate pop culture. So so there's that.
for better or for worse.
But yeah, exactly. We didn't even have to get too much into Joss Whedon there, which is
Yeah.
probably good. I
Joss Whedon is maybe more of a Jane-like heroic figure.
actually that's another reason this is quite a good fit,
There
actually,
could
isn't it?
be a very interesting analogy between the way that he's been celebrated and brought down and
Yeah,
the complexities there.
yeah.
Um,
Joss Whedon kicked Charisma Carpenter off the spaceship when it was 30 feet up, and uh,
um,
and all that stuff. Anyway, we won't get to
yeah.
that. I did also want to get you a recommend for another episode of something that's not Firefly, just anything you fancy.
um, and another just random episode of television.
Yeah, you can think about that. I should have forwarded that to you, really, but obviously we discussed Buffy a bit, but like it doesn't have to be Whedon, but it's
Um, well, first thing that comes to mind off the top of my head, the episode of Father Ted, The Mainland, where they get stuck in the caverns and Mrs. Doyle gets into a fight in a tea house with
brilliant,
with one of her friends over who's going to pay the bill,
A-
which
absolutely
is
amazing.
one of the most accurate portrayals of old ladies in a tea house.
Yes, which I guess you get to see a fair bit of. It's also
Oh,
got the bit where Ted's outside the caves and he spots Richard Wilson, the actor, and he's like, you know
yeah.
what would be really funny? You know what would be really funny, dude? Which is just fantastic. Well chosen. Well chosen. Okay, well, thanks, Nannina, and thanks for joining me for great chats over what, like 4.5 years at this stage in this format, and I've really enjoyed it. genuinely every minute of it, and it's been really fantastic and enriching. So I just want to say thanks.
May there be many more chats, whether they're recorded or not.
I think so. And
Yeah.
see you soon.
See you soon.
I've got 5 so far.
How did you get 5? I've only got 3.
Well, I've got 5. Okay, you first.
Victor. He is, of course, top of the list. Uncle Adrian. Ha!
Yeah, I got both of them.
Oh, yeah. Whoever it was that stole my copy of Blue Suede Shoes. Rah.
No, I haven't got him.
Oh, so who else?
The man at the fish shop.
Why, Dom? You don't even know him.
I don't care. He's still on the list. All people who work at fish shops. In fact, all fish.
Well, that's only 3. Who else?
Lee.
I love your dad.
This is my list, not yours.
You can't kill your dad. He's the best dad in the entire history of the universe.
Anyway, method of killing?
And that's only 4.
4 then.
Let me see that list.
I said 4.
The bulge. Dom, that's horrible. The poor unborn thing. That's truly horrible. Cross that out.
No. Get off! Get off!
Hi, Drew. Welcome back. How's it going?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. It's great to be back. I'm very much looking forward to discussing these pieces with you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and thanks for coming back for the 5th as well. Because you were there from the very early stages. I'd only been doing them when I was still doing them at the ridiculous breakneck pace of 1 a week. You can tell it was lockdown. I think it was like episode 7. I think you were on the Roger Rabbit episode, and I still think that's one of the best sort of straight two-handers that we've done. Just because, partly because of it's a great movie to talk about, but also just like your knowledge and passion for animation and the ways in which it interacts with live action stuff in Roger Rabbit was just kind of a bit spellbinding, if I ever say so myself. So it was a great time.
Oh, that's so kind of you. Yeah, it was great. I really had a good time, and it feels like this has been long overdue. Like I appreciate that you could, like, now that we're not in lockdown, we have to return. We've returned to normality, and we're having to sort of crack on with life. But it's great to see that you're still doing this, because this is something which, it sort of encourages me to look up things that I haven't thought of for a while as well. I imagine all of your guests might have a sort of similar relationship with that, sort of looking at things that they are familiar and fond of, but haven't turned their attention to for a while. So thanks for the excuse to delve into these dinosaur treats today.
No, not at all. No, I appreciate it, and I'll talk to people about the double bill that you've been wily enough to select today, because it's brilliant. But I think these are a great excuse to keep in touch with people. They are kind of virtual pub chats, really, aren't they? And they're a great way to maintain and stoke friendships. And obviously, I record them with a lot of people who live quite far away from me now. Maybe I once lived near or lived with, and actually, I hadn't really thought about it, but our situation's changed in that respect since we started these, isn't it? Because when we first started recording them, we did live quite near each other in London, and now we don't anymore. So it's actually it should probably prompt us to do more of this, whether recorded or not. We should have more chats like this.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy how you can be so far away and yet so accessible now with technology. Our fingertips, and I appreciate you have guests overseas who do this with you, and there's no excuses to not be doing this as often as we can in the same time zone, so
same time zone. At the moment you start doing different time zones for these sorts of things, like the same time zone seems so vanilla in terms of scheduling.
yeah, I bet
it's really easy.
Yeah, if you've got half a day to play with, that's kind of getting a bit crazy, but still, like, well worth it. When your guests are so passionate about this kind of thing, then I guess it's worth kind of like either getting up early or staying up late for. So,
well, very rewarding, yeah. And I was going to say, actually, in terms of passion for the subject, I already talked about the Roger Rabbit one we did. The Roadrunner chat that you and me and Rich had shortly after that, and it was all kind of within the first sort of run of them, which was quite intensive. That still gets some of the biggest download figures of the podcast of a whole. That one, which is really it's really popular, and I see why actually, because some of what I want to do with the show is like kind of create stuff that I would want to listen to online. I'd like to stumble across it, and I kind of, to the extent that I fantasize about this show having, quote unquote success, not in a material sense. It's like that. It's that idea of like people stumbling across it, going, "Oh, cool! Like I wish this conversation existed, and here it is." It's, and I would love to like turn on a detailed dissection of the first 10 Roadrunner cartoons, and now one exists on the internet.
Yeah, well, I'd be curious to know what sort of informs those peaks and troughs in sort of like popularity.
Me too.
But yeah, so you can capitalize on it. But it's great to hear that there are audiences out there that are dipping into things that me and you are both kind of like curious about or passionate about or whatever. Because it's just nice to even though we're not directly sort of like chatting to these people, just hearing that people are actually listening, it kind of feels a bit more worth it, doesn't it? So it's nice to hear that people are sort of dipping in, listening.
No. Utterly fantastic, and I'll probably re-promote that episode if the Coyote movie ever surfaces from the Warner Brothers vaults. Whatever on earth is going on with that now.
Oh, yeah, it has to happen, man. Like, I feel positive about it. I feel like it's if it's pretty much there, then why not?
It's just so. I mean, don't have time to get into Warner Brothers and whatever financial shenanigans are going, whatever financial Ragnarok is going on over there, but it's ridiculous. I should say then before we start the subject matter today, it's I think I like things that we do on the podcast that are kind of unique for it, like things that we don't do very often. And one thing we don't do very often is kind of insert monologues, so to speak. And I think your contribution to the Count Duckula episode, which itself is a while ago now, I think that's about 2 years old now. You sent me this sort of like stitched together lecture essentially about the history of Cosgrove Hall and their animation styles and constraints and everything. And I just think that came together remarkably well. And you have this isn't just me blowing smoke at all the guests and everything, but I think you have a great voice for it, and you know the topic, and you sound very, dare I say it, authoritative. I'd actually like to hear more of those.
Well, I'm again, like I think in your first episode I sort of alluded to like I'm not really an animator. I sort of studied animation, but I am kind of passionate about it. I sort of look up things before I talk about them. But that Duckula episode was interesting because I had tons of time to prepare and make. So there was loads of takes. I did loads of takes. In my computer archive audio folders, there's probably like 100 times more what you actually hear, and what I chatted about was long enough in itself. So I feel in hindsight I feel like I was blabbing on a bit too long, but it's nice to know that that you received that well, and I hope that your audiences received that well too, because it was great. And I felt like there wasn't one sort of like thing that I wanted to leave out in all of the research I did, because it felt so kind of appropriate to your to Duckula and the creation of. I felt like that is important to give a more sort of like complete picture of that. So it's tricky to edit when you're sort of looking at sort of an entire sort of like original creation.
Yeah, no, it came together remarkably well, and I think it complements the sort of show it is, really, because it's the EscapeGoat Podcast is a big patchwork duvet essentially of like patches of people talking about things and talking to other people about them, and discussions and inserts. And it's actually, that's kind of why I've chosen this form for the 5th anniversary. That sounds like I'm in Ghostbusters now. Choose the form that the 5th anniversary will take.
Yeah, I should have chosen Gozer.
Try not to think about anything. But yeah, this is that sort of thing. Your voice will be alongside other people's, and I'll create a big compendium of these, which will be fun. And well done, by the way, because I'm a generous god. So you asked to be able to pick 2 episodes to talk about, and it's that I'm glad I said yes, because this is an absolutely masterful double bill. I love this as a double bill.
Yeah. I rewatched both of them sort of like last night and this morning. And I'm kind of glad that I put these together as a double bill, but I thank you for entertaining the idea of sort of like putting these 2 things together. Obviously, that as we dip in, like people will see there are similar themes throughout, but they're quite polar as well. So that's something which I'm looking forward to discussing with you.
Yeah, I'm interested to drag out some similarities, some connections. Apart from the obvious, but I'll just, so straight away, what we're talking about here is a kind of well, the more explicable thing is we're talking about an episode of the first series of the animated show Primal. So we'll leave that till second, I think. But let's talk about.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's good. But let's talk first about the first choice, which is I don't even really know how to describe this. It is kind of an episode of a TV show.
Mm.
It's an episode always kind of retrofigured to be an episode of Jim Henson Presents, right?
Yes, the Jim Henson Hour, as it's otherwise known, or there's something like Muppet TV as well, which is I've heard all kinds of things of how this could have fitted into a series of Muppet-based TV shows.
Yeah. I did quite a lot of reading as well because it's quite confusing. I think partly Jim Henson, towards the end of his life, and this was very towards the end of his life, was putting out a lot of stuff, and a lot of different.
And he was very confused.
I'm very confused, yeah, and this of course involves Brian Henson as well. But yeah, it's Living with Dinosaurs, which some of our audience might be familiar with. It was made in '89, about I think.
Yes, yeah, 1989. So I would have been 4 when this was created, and probably even I think that's when it was aired on TV.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I can go into that more, but yeah, I was 4 years old when I first saw this, I think.
Yeah, let's talk about that because I'd be about the same age, and the kid in it, the sort of child protagonist, is a bit older than us, but not much. He's sort of inhabiting a childhood that's a bit familiar to both of us, I'd imagine, in some respects, in terms of furnishings and sort of period decor and everything. But it is a standalone. Living with Dinosaurs is a standalone TV movie. Basically, it's about 50 minutes long, and it was released as part of this Jim Henson project. It features Brian Henson, doesn't it, being puppeteer and voice of Dog, the main puppet in this.
Yeah, and I wonder if quite uniquely for a Henson production, like there's only one Henson sort of name in it. I mean, one Henson voice in it. Usually you've got like a cacophony of characters, but this is one. I can't think of any other show where there's just one character, from the Jim Henson universe. So
no, it's very focused, isn't it, in that respect? It's interesting. I didn't realize as well because you sent me a couple of links that I could watch it with. It's relatively hard to find online. I ended up using the YouTube link because one of the other links that you sent me wasn't working that well in my streaming. But I'm glad I did the YouTube link because the YouTube link had the Jim Henson intro and outro.
Yeah.
Where he's in that bizarre sort of CGI temple or something.
Yeah.
Well, I don't even know what that even is.
Just this morning, I was watching another episode of the Jim Henson Hour, and they sort of break the fourth wall about that area, and that they're in that area with the white lion sort of puppet, and they sort of talk about the blue screen element of it, and I think so the Jim Henson Hour didn't just cover sort of standalone episodes, they sort of went into the making of sort of Jim Henson Productions as well. But that intro and outro was something I hadn't seen until literally a few days ago. For me, it was just this thing was recorded from the television. I think it was on Channel 4, and my dad recorded it sort of along with Labyrinth, the film Labyrinth. So this was sort of like an aperitif to Labyrinth, and my sister and I used to watch it. We would pick this film because it means that we could stay up a little bit longer because we get to see Living with Dinosaurs first and then Labyrinth.
Oh, that's great and very fitting actually, because this is a good double bill, but that and Labyrinth are a good double bill, aren't they, as well? There's a kind of little boy and adolescent girl kind of double feature there, and actually, isn't that fitting for you and your sister as well, given your ages?
Yeah. I think I mean it was. I think Channel 4 knew what they were doing, sort of back in the late 80s, early 90s. They were sort of, I think they were doing sort of a run of Jim Henson celebrations, and this is just all going off memory, but that's kind of what I remember from the VHS tape is the intro to this being sort of like a celebration of Jim Henson. So that's how I remember it, without the intro, the Jim Henson intro, and I think that takes away from it massively. I think if you just go straight into the film, because I have seen that YouTube version as well, and it kind of has a bit of a trailer, doesn't it? Is it Jim Henson himself or Brian Henson who's introducing
Jim Henson's standing up and introducing it, and it's always that weird dislocating thing where I think you've probably seen more of Jim Henson talking as himself, but I've seen little of that. So when he opens his mouth, and I know it's a little bit different, but essentially Kermit's voice comes out, I'm always just like, it almost feels like something you shouldn't see, behind the curtain,
This is a film about a little boy.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. In the same way that whenever you see Frank Oz speak, he's basically Fozzie. It's like a little bit twisted.
Yeah.
If you see him in American Werewolf and stuff. But no, it does have that, and I agree it's better contextualized. Actually, I noticed in that in that intro sort of title sequence, you see like stuff, whizzing around in sort of CSO insets in a very 80s way. And one of the things is you see a glimpse of, is it John Hurt as the storyteller? You see,
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because this was very linked to that, wasn't it? I think is the lion from the storyteller, the lion puppet.
I'm not sure. It's been so long since I've seen The Storyteller, and The Storyteller is another great Jim Henson TV series. Might dip into that. They had sort of two runs. They had the Greek mythology sort of run, and I think more folklore series. But yeah, it's great to see little snippets, and I think when you see those, it's a very sort of clever way to sort of pique your interest in things because it's so eclectic. The whole Muppet universe is so eclectic. I imagine there's something for everybody. So.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and it's something for every kid. And isn't it funny that, isn't it in a slightly cheeky way, the boy in Living with Dinosaurs mentioned Sesame Street and Fraggle Rock?
Yeah, that I never picked that up. Sort of like growing up with it, that they are sort of Henson creations. But he says that there's like in that little scene when he's talking about what he wants to watch on TV, it feels like he might be a little bit too old for Sesame Street. Actually,
I know it doesn't quite ring true, really, does it?
Yeah, it's very sort of shoehorned in, but the Fraggles I can imagine. Yeah, and then he's like, oh, and it's like it's on the same time but a different channel to football or something, and he's like, it's.
Well, I love that. I love it. It's a really great period marker of it. I mean, not period then, but period now to us. That one marker, because we'll talk about the themes of, and sort of like kind of weird grittiness of it actually, because it is. I'm sure that's part of the reason you picked it, but it's I love what one marker of their relative poverty is that he's incredulous and annoyed that they don't have a video player.
Yeah. I think generally sort of like they're behind in terms of technologies of the time, and yet like that feels like a really sort of like period way to sort of like to demonstrate that poverty. Like you say, it's odd. I kind of remember when we first got like a VHS player recorder. I think it's more the recording aspect. I'm sure like that was something that those two sort of like capabilities of a VHS piece of technology might have been separate once upon a time, and then you can get a combined sort of VHS recorder stroke player. I'm not sure, but it is weird sort of hearing about him desiring like videotapes.
Yeah. Definitely, especially when you're like consuming it, like, as you've just said, like on videotape as a ritual. It's
yeah. For me, that was very much like again something that washed over me as a kid. Like, oh, we just had a video player. Like,
yeah,
it wasn't a big deal.
It's a fascinating thing, isn't it? Because this is basically like a piece of kitchen sink realism in some ways, and it does have some quite upsetting elements in quite intense emotional settings, and there are some quite weird bits as well, not just visually, but weird bits of dialogue and stuff, which you could argue how appropriate they are for a piece of children's media, if you look at it traditionally. But I love them, and some of them stood out. But I think it's interesting how it's sort of kitchen sink realism married with this fantasy setting, isn't it? And with Dog the puppet, being this voice of sort of childhood imagination, but it's quite complicated childhood imagination, isn't it? It's not just escape. It's kind of it's almost like as a character, it's almost like a voice for some of his bitterness and resentment.
Yeah, and again, sort of as a child, I never saw it as an extension of himself. I think what makes this sort of short film work for both adults and children is I think you get a different takeaway from it depending on your perspective. So as a kid, and this is one of the reasons why I picked this, was because this was so sort of like a fundamental part of my childhood. As a kid, you sort of just think that every adventure that he goes on with Dog, and Dog's voice is his own thing. They are two separate characters, and they're true. When he goes under the bed covers and goes into the cave, that happens in real life. Like as a kid, I thought, oh, that's happening, but the parents just don't know it's happening. As an adult now, it's quite more clear to me that this is just an extension of his imagination. Dog is this. Like it's almost like his guilt in some respects, like it's his guilty feelings towards his hatred of his father and his unborn sibling. So Dog is kind of like a more sympathetic character, outwardly, and it's almost like that's what he wants to be, is more sympathetic, but he isn't, and so he goes against that.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I think it's funny the sort of monstrous bat in the cave scene reminded me of the way they do that in Batman Forever. When Bruce Wayne is traumatized as a kid. Because it's sort of like in that it seems larger than it can possibly be. And that kind of thing. But the bit where I was going to talk to you about like Freudian interpretations of all of this, and I think we'll touch on some quickly, but like I mean the scene where he like goes upstairs to the room where it's almost like his parents' like retreat room almost, and like he opens the fridge and it gets covered in a cascade of like fish and everything. I'm just like, I mean, Freudians would have an absolute field day with all this.
Yeah. God, it's I don't think we ever really get to the bottom of why he hates fish, do we? As well, but I mean, filming that scene for a start must have been horrible because it looks like literally just fish.
Yeah, I know. It's like Ripley being covered, like it's being dragged down into the aliens in Alien Resurrection or something. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's disgusting as well. And like this young lad, if he did sort of like genuinely sort of go through that, I don't know, it's very quick, that cut, isn't it, from like him getting covered in fish to him lying on the floor and there's only a few fish.
Yeah.
Kudos to the actors in part of that. If those were you like real fish, they might have been like rubber, I don't know, but they certainly look very real. So and that is quite a horrible moment. Like up to that point, I don't really care about fish. About he's got a real phobia of fish, hasn't he? So and he lives in a seaside town. I looked up; it's sort of like on the coast near Norfolk, because there's a pub at the very beginning. I've always wanted to know, and so like this time round, when I was watching it, I was like, where is this actually set? Because the accents don't really sort of like pin it down. But yeah, like so that might be his like part of his fear is he lives near a seaside town, and it's just something that he's got this irrational sort of phobia about because he's had a bad experience. But I as an audience, you don't really care about that until he gets covered in them, and at that point you're like, ugh, that's horrible. It's really horrible.
No, it's very vivid, and I mean, actually, as not only someone who had the same thing as a kid, I still don't like really walking past fish stalls and like fishmongers. I think it's a bit gross, especially when there's live crabs and things like that. It's just nasty. But also, I was a childhood asthmatic. So the idea of, I see quite a lot of your biography in this, being that I know you well, but I also see little reflections of my childhood and actually just sort of like something about the home, because we both grew up in kind of, quite lower middle class homes and stuff, it's like that just kind of the decor and the setting they're living in and the fact that the parents are, especially at this time in my life, like not very well off and are kind of doing their best. And, I'm sure a lot of this is quite, not to spoil you for the audience, but I'm sure quite a lot of this is familiar to you as well, and that must make it resonate as well.
Totally. One of the biggest sort of things that resonates is his dad being an artist, a struggling artist. Because I remember, like, it might have been when I was about the age that I first saw this. My dad was sort of looking for work. He was teaching at a college once upon a time as an artist, and like trying to sort of like break through into the art world, but then having to settle for like a sort of more run-of-the-mill job, which is what happens to Lee, the father in this story. That's something which I didn't realize how much of a connection that had to me, when I was a kid. But that was definitely something that, in hindsight, totally resonated with me. And now I'm looking at that sort of like, looking back at my childhood self, sort of like making that realization that it's because his dad is also an artist. There's nice correlations there.
Well, I think it's a very moving coming of age story, isn't it? But afterwards, I was sort of thinking, what is this about? What is the theme of this? And because his dad has that lovely speech about dinosaurs at the end, essentially about adaptation. And I was like, well, it's really neat, isn't it? Because it's a coming of age story for him, for the kid, and it's a coming of age story for the dad as well, and for the mum, you could argue as well. But
the focus of the relationship is. I think they balance it really well. They do something, and it feels really British as well. But it's all the little nuances, like little kisses and things like that, and calling things hug bug instead of just a hug, and things like that make it feel really real. To me, it feels like we are just sort of taking a snapshot from this family. And some of the acting is a little bit woody in places, but other than that, I think it really does sort of like capture, an element of sort of like. British culture in like an average family kind of thing. But yeah,
they're a very believable family unit, aren't they? Like as you say, the acting varies a bit. The kid actually, sounds a bit stage schooly, and he sort of reminds me a bit of Kevin from Time Bandits and stuff like that. But the family as a whole, the affection. I mean, the script basically. I saw that the script was by Anthony Minghella. I think Jim Henson mentions that in his intro. Who I think most famously went on to do The English Patient and stuff like that. So there's like
Oh,
a real
wow.
and the storyteller apparently, well, bits of the storyteller, but yeah, there's a real pedigree here, and I think the script is mostly quite nuanced and interesting and tender.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll come back to tender, but but it also allows for dark jokes because like a lot of dogs dialogue is pretty sharp, and like I was actually sort of, it took my breath away when they're talking about ways to kill people. It's like very Roald Dahl, you know. It's not unbelievable or unsuitable for kids. You know, kids do that. Kids have like revenge fantasies and stuff like that. And it's quite cartoonish, you know, especially when they talk about, you know, the bully being turned into a zit and being like squashed. You know, they're like laughing with glee, which is really infectious. But I was kind of like at that stage in it because there were darker adult themes going on about poverty and about frustration and weird repression and stuff. I was like, is this going to go really dark? Like, what's going to happen? I kind of wondered what you got me in for here. You know, I wondered what was going to happen.
Yeah, it could have taken a real dark turn, couldn't it? Because it's about the reliance on and the preservation of innocence from the child's point of view. He has this, for lack of a better term, imaginary friend, doesn't he? And it's sort of setting itself up for tragedy. Or it could set itself up for tragedy quite nicely when they're talking about death already, and I guess what we're alluding to here is his mother is pregnant, and so there's, you know, the potential for a miscarriage or something there, or even the fact that they kind of allude to death earlier on, and he has asthma. You know, you don't know how this is going to go, but fortunately it does just have a very simple kind of, it's not even a happy ending. It's just sort of, you know, it just sort of trails out. You know, it's like we dip into these people's lives at sort of a pivotal moment, and then we dip out again.
Yeah,
and I think that's quite a nice way of sort of wrapping up a story.
Yeah, it's a thematically satisfying ending, but it's not really an ending. These people's lives will carry on, and there's been this next chapter of them, and it's heartwarming because, you know, the dad has sold this artwork, but he also has, as you say, compromised a little bit with the adult material world, and he's got this. But I like that he's got like a, you know, boring grown up adult job, but it is only 2 days a week, as he emphasizes.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
He can still do stuff, you know. He can still sculpt, and it's kind of. And you kind of like realizing, well, he was insisting on having a lot of free time there, wasn't he? I mean, he was being a bit unreasonable, really, from a material perspective. And the mum was actually being extremely polite and supportive about the whole thing, really.
Yeah, there is quite a patriarchal problem here, isn't there? But I think, I mean, it might just be indicative to the times. You know, how much money you can make sort of from like a part-time job, and, you know. I don't know. I really don't know. But Lee, the father, he has some of the most problematic lines for me, some of the most problematic interactions, because he seems quite volatile at times.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he?
And unreasonable. But I can forgive it because it's only 50 minutes, and I think they've got to show a real spectrum of his relationship, and it's difficult because his relationship with his son and his relationship with his wife. And talk about Lee the father, like he has to kind of get in certain points where he is, you know, struggling and frustrated and upset with himself, and he sort of snaps at his son a couple of times, and also supportive of his wife. They talk about having rows and stuff when she's, you know, heavily pregnant, nearly about to give birth, kind of, you know, the last stages of pregnancy. I think it must be difficult to do all of that in 50 minutes when he doesn't have that many lines of dialogue. So
it's a great sketch. It's like a mini portrait of this, you know, quite on edge man, really. You know, and as I say, it ends happily, but it could end up more darkly. And he's a real eccentric. You know, they emphasize that he is an eccentric artist, and he's quite an odd dude. You know, when he like takes his kid to school and he's doing the weird voices and lying down in the street.
Yeah,
and...
I'm just going to lie here and wait for him.
Yeah, the other adults, you know, he seems to meet are like, is this guy all right? You know, like, and it's kind of, we all know people like that, you know. You could argue we are people like that, and but these people have families, and, you know, people work it out, and, you know, he seems to be with this woman who really, really adores him, and, you know, is putting up with this stuff and guiding him through it, and that's a great performance from her, by the way. She goes on to be in Truly Madly Deeply, which is a film my mum has a lot of affection for, and I eventually saw. And I believe the actor in this who plays the dad is also in Truly Madly Deeply, so they must have had the same contacts and got on and stuff. You know who I thought the mother was when I turned it on? Like when she's first introduced and she wants to see him in his uniform, wants to see the kid in his uniform. I thought it was the actress who plays Mombi in Return to Oz.
Yeah.
who I think is called Jean Marsh, but she has, I think this is Juliet Stevenson, but Jean Marsh has a very similar face shape, and she's very, very English the same way,
Yeah,
and she has
yeah.
just that sort of quite long face, and it's kind of. I was like, oh my God, it's Mombi, because it was about the right time for her to be in it, and that was another source of childhood trauma. But it isn't her. But Juliet Stevenson is a very well-known actress and went on to much bigger things.
Yeah, I looked up briefly like what the actors did, and I think of all of them, I can't remember. Me, I'm terrible when it comes to actors' names, but the uncle in this,
Oh yeah, he's a very Roald Dahl character as well.
he is, yeah. He's still very much acting. I think they all are really, but he's sort of arguably had a fair bit of fame as well, and he just seems like a bit of a side character. So yeah, I think pretty much everybody in this sort of continued their acting career, which is nice to see. I even looked up, the little girl bully. She's sort of like stayed in acting for a little while as well. So, and all of the main characters, especially the adults, feel like they've very much come from the theatrical stage actors first. I think they've got that flavour about them, and again, quintessentially English, sort of like in different ways. So yeah, it does sort of form a nice medley, all of them together, all the characters together. But like I say, like it was so difficult to pin down their accents. It's so weird. It's
Yeah. Well, and a lot of media from that period that I don't know if this involved like American money. I guess it might have involved American co-production stuff with the Henson, outfit and everything, like a lot of the Muppet Show did. But you end up often, don't you? Things like Hellraiser spring to mind in this sort of weird nebulous England that isn't quite anywhere. And I wouldn't say this is that actually. I'd say obviously there's actors from different places, but this has quite a strong sense of place. It does feel like a believable place.
yeah.
But you can end up in that. I wanted to mention the Elvis thing on two levels. One is a weird coincidence. You know how we're recording this in early 2025, and a lot of people have been marking David Lynch's death. And I went to Cultplex in Manchester recently. I think I mentioned to you to see a David Lynch double bill, as it turns out, and they showed the movie Wild at Heart with Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern, and that ends with Nicolas Cage singing "Love Me Tender" to Laura Dern. so that was only about a year and a half after this. So I was like, so if there's influence there, it goes from this to that. So I was like, did David Lynch watch Living with Dinosaurs?
Possibly. And the takeaway was end on "Love Me Tender." That's how to end the movie.
It's pretty Lynchian. I mean, I guess a dog isn't that far away from the Razorhead baby cousins. But,
yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to mention going forward, because I was thinking like, what is this a bit like? What are some obvious similarities here? Imaginary friend stuff, and I was like, well, Drop Dead Fred a little bit. With the stuffed animal, it's more like Ted, I guess you could say. It's like a pilot for Ted.
That's exactly what I've thought. Parallel.
That's definitely in there, isn't it? That's the sort of rude, crude comedy version of this. But did it also occur to you? I was like, this is definitely reminding me of something when you started going on about Elvis, and I was like, oh, it's Lilo and Stitch.
Oh wow! No, I'd never made that connection. But yeah, it's funny how this sort of small, squashy, fluffy character just aligns himself with like a sort of iconic, like rock star. Yeah. No, I'd never thought of that before.
One of my favorite lines was when he's dressing up as Elvis, dog is dressing up as Elvis and looking in the mirror, and he says, "Do you know who I am?" And the kid's like almost like wearily, he's like, "Are you Elvis Presley?" And he like almost like fancying himself a bit. He looks back in the mirror, he's like, "The young Elvis Presley."
Yeah. I think just after that, they're looking through that telescope thing in the kid's window. I think they can see the uncle arriving in the car, and he's got the dog has got the shades on, and he just says shades. And so Dom, the boy, has to like lift the shades up. I just really like that he's a bit of a diva as well. It's like
he's quite sassy.
Yeah, proper little sassy.
He's a good character. I love the bit when he gets his stuffing ripped out, which is quite upsetting, and then just when he's asking him how he is, and he sort of comes back to life as as they do, and he just says "ouch," and I just found that really really moving. It's like, quite restrained.
It's sad, isn't it? Like and later on you see him. Still with the stuffing, and it's the way he's moving as well. Is like I can't stand pain, and he's sort of holding his hands up like it's really good puppetry. I think this is one of those things where it's an absolute testament to the Henson franchise. The Henson name is how believable this stuffed creature is. because it just has to look like a teddy bear. Basically, it's a teddy bear dinosaur that we're talking about, but its movements and the synchronization with its speech is so bang on. Like, it never misses a beat. It never becomes you never sort of like fall into disbelief that this like dog is talking. If you're with me, I think that's great. That's one of the things that Henson does better than anybody in terms of puppetry.
Yeah, it's masterful, isn't it? It's brilliant. Well, thank you for bringing that as the first part. I really, really enjoyed that, and I'm glad I'd never even heard of it. I mean, I'd heard of some of the stuff Henson was putting out about that time, but I'd never heard of that. It was fascinating. So, I mean, you've constructed this double bill, and I think even before I knew what to talk about living with dinosaurs, I actually thought, even when I asked you, I was like, oh, you might pick an episode of Primal, because I remember we talked about this back, a few years ago when it came out. I think it maybe started in 2019, 20. I know it's going still. I think that it's had 2 series and there's plans for a 3rd series. Primal, for anyone who doesn't know, is a sort of it's an animation from the animator who brought Samurai Jack, isn't it? He's known for Samurai Jack.
Yeah, Genny Tarkovsky, I think is how you say his name. Genny Tarkovsky.
And I love the way that you've picked these like 2 almost like iconic animators. Like I mean, Henson is a sort of animator, and you've picked Tarkovsky, who has this like fervent fan base. And I watched a bit of Primal when it was on. I watched it on Channel 4 when it came on in 2020, and I was very impressed. But it was just one of those things I never picked up further. I watched a couple of episodes, and I think you went on to. Have you actually watched the whole 2 series that exist?
I have, yeah. It's one of those things that I got really obsessed with, and I don't do this often with like TV shows, but it was something that I couldn't wait for the next episode. I watched them sort of as they were being released on Channel 4. I think they came out really late in the evening, but then I'd catch up on 4OD. But yeah, like I mean, just to backtrack a little bit, it was always going to be an animation that I was going to bring to you as my suggestion, and I danced around the idea of doing that BoJack Horseman episode where he goes underwater. I thought about Blue Eye Samurai, which I'm really, really, really keen to promote, and Bob's Burgers as well. All of those things are things that I really, really love. But what I love about Primal is, especially in the first season, you can take any sort of one episode completely out of sequence and it works as a standalone. And that's partly why I sort of wanted to do it as a double bill with this episode we're going to talk about, Plague of Madness, which is episode 7 in series 1. That is very much, it can just be its own thing. You don't have to watch any more episodes.
It was very easy to pick up from my perspective in that respect. And for anyone who doesn't know Primal, the basic plot is a Neanderthal man meets a T-Rex, and they become friends. A working partnership.
Yes.
Kind of a pragmatic friendship, I suppose. And as you'll know from, if anyone knows their, I was going to say history, that's a bit patronizing. Most people listening to this probably know that Neanderthal man and dinosaurs did not exist at the same time. And it's a bit of a fantasy world, it's a bit of a fantasy amalgam of that thing. And this episode was a good showcase for that, actually, in a way that I didn't quite expect. And deepen my understanding of how fantastical it is in some ways. I love that apart from all the darkness and violence and bleakness in this, I love that it's also got a little bit of the wackiness of the Flintstones just by that inherent premise.
Yes, it does. It does. It is kind of crazy that like a Primal in the whole is incredibly sort of evocative in of all emotions, but like every so often you do get like a little bit of comic relief. This episode is very short on that. So this is another reason why I wanted to bring it to you.
Yeah, it's intense, this episode.
Yeah, totally. And again, that sort of like just expressive form of animation, use of color, use of shape dynamics, all of that stuff goes into what makes this series great. But they do sort of like, to touch on your point, they do in series 2 get far more fantastical. Like series 1 is mostly like almost like the X-Files monster of the week. It's like that every single episode. Series 2 they have far more of a narrative, and you even see other men. And it's like Vikings. They're sort of a tribe of people akin to Vikings. There is a tribe of people akin to sort of ancient Egyptians. In series 2, it gets really kind of really fantastical in terms of the medley of various cultures that it's taking from. I think it's fine, but I prefer it when it's just the monster of the week. It's just there's only so many you can watch of that before getting bored of that as an idea.
Am
So
I
I can
right in
see.
saying that more dialogue starts to creep in series two? I think I read that there's a little bit of dialogue in series two.
Yes, there is far more. Like, I mean, there are languages and things which are spoken between tribes and between people, whereas in this one it's just grunts and moans and sort of gestures,
Yeah,
which is another thing that I love about it.
yeah. There's no dialogue in this at all, is there? You know, there's just as you say, animal and human noises.
Yeah, and,
and
and that was very deliberate for series one. Genny Tarkovsky, I'm gonna have to practice saying that name. He said that when he was making Samurai Jack, some of the biggest ratings were the ones where there was no dialogue. Some of the best big hitter episodes were ones where it was just raw animation, and so that's what he wanted to do. And again, calling it Primal and making it all about visceral sort of like feelings and emotions, and using like colors and like movement and stuff like that, and sound, which we'll talk about in a minute, like very important. That this is an exploration of that and a celebration of that, I think.
it is, and this episode, for anyone who doesn't know, is basically a visceral chase thriller. I think probably from what I've heard and seen, a lot of the first series probably falls into that bracket. But this is. I said it was a fantastical premise even on top of that because it basically features zombie dinosaurs, really, doesn't it? There's a plague, you could call it a rage virus. There's something happening. You don't really find out the origin of it. I don't know if you ever do. It's attacking specifically. It seems to be infecting these like herbivorous dinosaurs, and I don't know if that was on Tarkovsky's point of view. That was like a way to make these dinosaurs that we were sort of used to considering as the unthreatening ones threatening. Because basically, quite a lot of it they end up being pursued by something. I think it's meant to be a Brachiosaurus.
It's an Argentinosaurus, and he's infected by a Parasaurolophus. I don't know if I'm saying those names correctly, but yeah, in both cases, you're right. They are square teeth or billed herbivorous dinosaurs,
Yes,
and they are usually non-threatening, sort of like lumbering titans. But now the main antagonist in this becomes this unstoppable juggernaut. It reminds me of Spielberg's Duel.
yeah.
It's this relentless pursuit of this incredibly powerful but quite otherwise benign sort of force. It's just pure weight, isn't it? Like,
Yeah,
really.
well, and I know. Obviously, this was an influence on Cameron, but the Terminator, big time, right? Particularly the climax.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
The idea of like this skeletal thing or this increasingly skeletal becoming thing, pursuing you and having bits ripped off it and still coming after you. It's nightmare fuel, isn't it? And there is even a nightmare bit in this. The animation style gets to be outlandish as well because the way the plague, the infected dinosaurs are portrayed is quite outlandish and putrid and to do with this flesh dripping off and to do with their bones becoming exposed. And it actually reminded me of I suppose the whole thing is kind of in this aesthetic, isn't it? But there's quite a lot of like heavy metal in it. But also I was thinking a bit of early Ren and Stimpy as well.
Oh yeah, I've never made the correlation between Ren and Stimpy and that sort of gross out kind of. I mean, Ren and Stimpy, whenever they do something that's kind of like disgusting, they will sort of shine the light on that one shot as like almost like a perfectly rendered sort of like close up on something, and that doesn't happen in Primal, but yeah, there's still some like really grotesque, horrible things happening. There's still like and super violent as well. I mean, we should probably put a little warning out, like if you're sort of grossed out by gore, this is not one for you. But
yeah.
But you're right with the heavy metal connection. I saw an interview with Tarkovsky saying that he originally sort of had like a classical soundtrack, and you hear that with sort of like a cello. But then they were like, no, this isn't working for this, especially this episode. So they threw in like a few bits of electric guitar, and it feels like a music video at times. So yeah, like I can, it works. It really works, I think, for me.
It does work, and I'm looking forward to watching more of the show and rewatching this episode as well, and picking up more on the sort of music cues and everything. I know the hunter is known as Spear, isn't he? And the dinosaur is known as Fang. Although I guess those aren't said in this first series. I guess those are just...
Yeah, no, I don't think they're ever said, actually. That it's just... I mean, he's a Neanderthal who holds a spear, and the T-Rex has a very one big tooth that's like a fang. So I guess that's just pet names for them, really.
I actually found Fang kind of adorable, like because it's actually it's a T-Rex, and you used to think of it as a threatening, but obviously in this episode there are bigger fish after them. But I actually find Fang like it's kind of like an adorably goofy looking character, partly because of that snaggletooth.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are other episodes which like. There's one where she's chasing butterflies, and you see how adorable she can be. And there's I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but there's one episode that's quite heartbreaking where she goes through a really bad time, and you see how that affects Spear. So the relationship between the two is really, really, like, throughout the series one is really good, because that does move. It sort of progresses. I mean, it's not just established from the first episode. They go through hunger together, for instance, and they go through this flight or fight sort of instincts, and sometimes they're at loggerheads with that. But in this episode, their connection is well established. So to talk about the episode a little bit, you've already sort of mentioned it's this Argentinosaurus sort of relentlessly pursuing them. But what I like about that is, like you say, she's a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Fang, the dinosaur, is this Tyrannosaurus Rex. And yet, this thing just absolutely terrifies her. So it's great to see how incredibly expressive you can make, a lizard look, and how you can reflect that also through this human character. I think that's the thing that Primal does incredibly well. But
Yeah, and I guess it's got a lot of obviously it's, I suppose, Fang in a way is a metaphor for a dog, essentially, isn't it? Like, it's all kind of, it's about a dog, and a dog, like, I don't know where they go with this, but you mentioned, like, there's a hunger, sort of famine episode and everything. Like, I guess the one thing about a dog is, like, even dog owners make grim jokes, don't they? Like, well, if I die, it'll just eat me. Like, it's
Yeah.
dogs are only just tame, really, aren't they? They're things we tamed, and it seems like Fang is that taken to extremes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think I'll have to rewatch the first series, but there's definitely sort of an episode where that might be sort of like crossing either character's minds, really. I mean, it's all about survival, isn't it? Was there anything about this episode that really shocked you? Was there anything that you thought was done well in particular?
I mean, it's all very grotesque and violent, as you say. Like, I mean, even the fact that it starts with a sort of prologue where you see the infection spreading before our main characters even turn up. Like, a lot of that's very nasty, but funny as well. Like, when one of the brontosauruses, if that's the right term these days you can't even say brontosaurus. It's looking down at that little infected dinosaur that comes out of the shrubbery, and it's kind of like, it's like dancing around it, and it's just utterly bemused. Like, it's not threatened.
Yeah.
It's just like, what is that? What is going on?
Really care. Yeah, and it's the way the Parasaurolophus sort of like just runs around in circles, making these strange squeaky noises.
Yeah,
like it's not normally a threat, is it? So the main lumbering titan just doesn't care, like you say, and he's so casually. I like the way. I think it's very deliberate. It's eating fruit at that point, and he doesn't bite. He takes one whole bite of a huge piece. It looks like a melon or something,
mm-hmm.
But then he very casually sort of takes a bite, sort of very gently, of the next melon. Like, he's enjoying himself. He's sort of savoring it at that point.
And you get the really tender moment of the dinosaurs literally necking as well. Like, there's two of them before all hell breaks loose. You get that little nice moment. I mean, I kind of liked how gonzo it went, because even before, as I say, you get to the main characters, you get the plague-ridden dinosaur like running after these other dinosaurs, and he basically does like a fatality on one of them. It is like a car chase, isn't it? He's running alongside the dinosaur, and he nudges him into this like forest of thorns, essentially, where he gets impaled. And I was like, wow, this is not messing about at this stage.
Yeah, and it's the thing that broke my heart was all the little eggs getting smashed as well. I mean, these are huge nesting sauropods, and they've established this nesting site. You can see almost, I don't know whether this is intentional, but I interpret it as you've got parents and grandparents and juveniles sort of like all in this spot, and then when the Parasaurolophus bites the main antagonist, the whole mood changes. Like, I love at that moment he's trying to take a drink. It's like he's infected. I'm saying we don't really know the sex, but this main Argentinosaurus is infected, and it's like he's trying to quench his thirst and he just can't, and then he turns and just smashes the entire family to pieces.
Well, and vomits blood several times.
I thought that was going to be like the whole herd was going to get infected, but no, we don't see that. We just see one, and it's the destruction just of one, like relentlessly destroying this innocent sort of like family. It's really horrible.
You almost get this, like, it's almost like this hidden history, isn't it? Like almost like a glimpse into something that could have could have happened millions and millions and millions of years ago, and it gets shut down in this episode eventually. But it could have wiped out the dinosaurs. It could have spread and spread and spread. But in the end, well, I suppose by it going after Spear and Fang, it eventually meets its maker. But it's kind of who knows what this thing was, and I like that it's just, at least within this episode, it's nicely self-contained. It's like, well, there's just some stuff we don't know about.
Yeah, it's I think it's very smart of the direction to because in previous episodes they've looked at monsters, like how powerful they are, but they are pursuing food. They are destroying things for sustenance. It's a great vehicle to have this incredibly powerful creature not like just like go on this path of destruction for the sake of destruction. I can't think of any other way to do that. But the links to the whole 28 days later kind of vibe of zombie works very well, I think, in this universe. It feels like anything fantastical as possible. They even sort of hint at magic and sort of like later episodes, or directly have magic and religious sort of like iconography. So it's very much canon, but it's nice to see something where it's just one very straightforward idea, a huge pursuit of something that's this relentless force against our two main heroes, and how the hell are they going to escape, because they cannot destroy this thing. And normally they find a way, they find a weakness, but in this case they are just running away.
Yeah, and eventually it kind of stumbles into destroying itself. Really, it's not really something they do. It just the landscape is so dangerous that it takes, and it's less mobile than they are. So
yeah. They end up in a volcanic crater, don't they? And the sauropod sort of like cracks through the Earth's crusts and ends up engulfed in lava and magma. And it's a great ending. I'd forgotten there's a point where this flaming sort of like wailing sauropod turning to ash. There's a moment where Spear holds out his hand, and a piece of ash, an ember like that's sort of glowing in yellow, lands on his hand, and he looks quite forlorn. He looks quite sad. Like he doesn't like destruction. He's like, and he appreciates the innocence of this creature, and how there's it's a destruction of this thing that shouldn't have been destroyed. Really, it's
yeah. I mean, they live in a world full of terrifying carnivores. Fang is one, but yeah. this is unnatural, and this creature didn't sign up for this. And it's been defeated, but it's not a happy moment. And there's this pathos kicks in, and it's the way the creature disappears. Finally, it takes a long time to die, and even in the lava, and then it sort of dissolves into ash beautifully.
Yeah. There is a sort of what next. It feels so like unstoppable. This from start to finish, he destroys this entire family, and then falls off a cliff, and then they're running through a ravine, and it's getting pieces torn off it. Yeah. It's constantly melting. It's skeletal. It's but you're seeing like exposed bones.
Yeah.
It's pouring, streaming tears and mucus and blood. And then in the very end, even when it goes under the crust of the crater, it's still alive. It still leaps out. It's like, what will stop this thing? It's sort of like I was really, when I was watching this, like, this is tense. Like, what on earth is going to end? How is this going to end? How are they going to?
It feels properly supernatural, doesn't it? Even if you allow that the plague is kind of supernatural, it's like it feels almost like beyond Romero sort of supernatural. Like there is something weirdly animating going on here. That's almost like making it super powered. It's like it's almost in the realm of like Marvel Comics or something.
Yeah.
It also reminded me very much of, you talk about the pursuit, the relentlessness, and the scale of it. Like it reminded me a bit of Monstro in Pinocchio.
That's a great parallel. Yeah, that's a really great parallel, because
the sort of grotesqueness that Disney used to do. They don't really do as much these days. That sort of really horrible scale.
Yeah, this huge lumbering leviathan, in pursuit of innocent, parties. It's really that is, yeah, and it's that. Again, like, what can stop this thing? You can either like, I think in Pinocchio they just managed to squeeze through a little hole in time, don't they?
Yeah.
Really,
Monstro sort of gets stuck in the rocks as well, basically.
Yeah. There's no stopping it. There's just sort of like, you can only get away. There's no defeating it. It has to defeat itself in terms of these huge forces.
Yeah, no, I loved it, and I've mentioned the dream sequence before. I love you talk about the connection between Spear and Fang. I love that Spear has that disturbing dream about him succumbing to the infection, and he sees his flesh sliding off his bones and all that kind of all that kind of horrific heavy metal imagery. But he also, the sort of like jump scare that makes him wake up is seeing that happen to Fang, seeing Fang turn, and that's I guess that's meant to convey some of the care there.
I think that's the only thing that's kind of canon about this particular episode is I think they've just gone through something together where that kind of nearly happened, and so it's almost like that was already put into his mind as a fear, and it's like he's arcing back to that, like he's just saved her basically, and now like he might lose her again, and yeah, you're right, that sort of really distills down like his feelings towards this pet. It's very much somebody that he depends on but loves. There's a love connection between them.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece of work and very disturbing, and a great companion with living with dinosaurs. two imaginary friend pet connections there. I love it. I mean, you mentioned some before. I was going to ask. You mentioned some episodes of some other TV shows you thought about including. In a second, last year, if you were to pick one of those, which would be your sort of backup pick. But is there a specific other episode of Primal? I get the impression you like the whole show, basically, to varying degrees. But like, is there another episode you'd recommend what people watching of Primal?
Yes, definitely. So there's one called. So it's called A Cold Death. That's the episode I would recommend, and I think that was one that won an award. And it's about this mastodon family sort of trying to make their way in a migration sense, and they come across Spear and Fang. But this is before Spear and Fang really have their connection so well established, and I think this helps to establish them. So that, again, is in Series 1. I think my two favourite episodes are in Series 1. But I'm a sucker for a Monster of the Week kind of a thing. I'm a big fan of that kind of thing as a as a vehicle for TV episodes.
I love it. Well, I'll probably rewatch the whole first series and possibly the second as well. But that's good. And you mentioned some before. But if you would want to pick another episode of another show, it's somewhat arbitrary, obviously. But if something you'd like to throw in the audience's direction, what would that be?
Yeah, there's an episode of there's two episodes of Bob's Burgers, which spring to mind. One is called Fluise, where it's Louise, the main character, who I just adore, sort of has these fever dreams, and that's kind of nice because it breaks the norm. But Bob's Burgers is usually very straightforward and non-fantastical, and that's something which I think is quite brave for an adult animation to do. But they sort of get to experiment a bit in this episode. And another one, I cannot remember the name of it, but it's another episode involving Louise, and she has to prepare a report. And she does her report on Amelia Earhart, but it was something that I genuinely brought me to tears at the end of it, because like it's the way she has this sort of like, she doesn't want to do this report on Amelia Earhart. She doesn't really care about Amelia Earhart, but it is a very it's a very tender piece, and it's a very nice episode that has a very, very tender ending. But I won't say any more on it.
I've not seen that one. That sounds great. I'll check it out. And thanks very much, Drew. And thanks for joining us for the 5th anniversary. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me back. Look forward to definitely do this again in the future. If you ever want to talk more puppets or more animations, I'm your guy.
Let's do it. I know you are. A rich resource. Okay. See you soon.
Yeah, see you soon. Thank you so much.
The sheriff joins us.
Whiskey.
Sheriff recently put me on notice he is vigilant of my possible transgressions.
You sound drunk to me.
Whom are you addressing?
You. You sound drunk.
Do I? When I say fuck yourself, Sheriff, will you put that down to drunkenness or a high estimate of your athleticism?
Did you just tell me fuck myself?
I think I did. And to shut up, I'll quiet you myself.
You're under arrest.
Fuck you, and shut up, or I will shut you up for good.
Threatening a peace officer. I'm taking you into custody.
Don't be stupid.
Don't you be fucking stupid.
Ah!
Fuck you.
Ah!
Johnny.
The sheriff eliminates several of our options. Not a fucking word comes to print.
Understood.
Hello, Kit. Welcome to this unusual celebration. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm really happy to be here for the 5th anniversary of the show, man. It's a real honor to be invited and a hell of a milestone. Congratulations to you. How you feeling? How does 5 years in the podcasting saddle feel?
It feels great to have stuck at it for some reason and to have kept going. And there were certainly like little episode number milestones that I was really glad when I crept past. You know, whatever else was going on in my life, I was like, oh, cool. That's 30. That's 40. That's 50. You know, it felt really good. But I think 5 years feels arbitrarily fun as well, and it's kind of because it's kind of just coincided with the first half of the 2020s as well, you know, for all their ups and downs.
I mean, downs and downs, really, but sure.
Yeah, downs and downs, yeah, with some mild zigzags there. But
the old plateau.
It does feel good, and I remember, you know, specifically getting you involved with the podcast. This would be in late 2020. I kind of because I'd listened to quite a lot of your recorded work and stuff, you know, in the years preceding that. I looked up to the work you had done and thought you were very good at it. So we were chatting online a lot at that time, and I think you were someone where I sort of, and this isn't just empty flattery, but I kind of felt like I had to get, you know, about 20 episodes under my belt to ask you to be on it. And then I think if you check the numbers, it is about episode 20 when I'm like, Kit, do you want to do this? And you were so nice about it. You were like, yeah, when were you going to ask? You know, you were dead sweet. So.
Well, that was what was funny about it. Was genuinely, I was listening to the show. I mean, I should say I don't listen to every episode of the show because I've got a pretty strict no spoilers policy, and you've covered a lot of stuff I haven't engaged with. But wherever there's an EscapeGoat episode about something I actually know, I listen to it because I love the show and I love the format. And I remember having this kind of internal push-pull about should I invite myself on this show and be like, no, play it cool, man. It's fine. He's finding his feet. Let him do his thing. It's okay. So yeah, I was delighted when you invited me because I was increasingly enjoying the format. And it's right up my street, right? It's the idea of like, you know, revisiting, you know, seismic influence work of whatever kind. I love that it's the eclectic nature of it, you know, music, TV, cinema, books, all that kind of stuff. You know, I was at that time, you know, doing similar work in written form with My Life in Horror. So it resonated really strongly with me as a format. And what I love about the format is it's something that, you know, because of the nature of that, it means that it's always going to be unique to the person producing it. And it gives it's a fascinating topography of like, you know, the inside of your brain, right? In terms of the cultural influences. So,
well, I like to think so.
Definitely.
I think it means that everyone could be a passion project, you know, and that's kind of nice.
Yes,
because I kind of don't get out of bed unless I want to do it. So it's kind of, you know, they're saying that, you know, there are times when I want to do them and then get to the end of a certain run of them and, you know, do that and fill the schedule. So, but it's such a loose schedule that it's I can do them in bursts. But I remember when we talked about that, you know, back in 2020, I sent you a message. I was like, you know, hey Kit, here's, you know, based on what you've said and, you know, what I know of you, here's 3 things you might want to talk about. First one, House of Cards, and you're like, House of Cards.
Yeah,
definitely. I was like, do you want to think more about that? You're like, no, like House of Cards.
Yeah,
which was good fun.
Well, again, because the reason is like at that point, everything I was doing had a horror focus, right? So like the opportunity to talk about a piece of pop culture that wasn't, you know, At least not, at least not traditionally a horror. I mean, you could argue that there's horrific elements in the House of Cards trilogy, but yeah, it was a real delight because yeah, again, it was that opportunity to spread the wings a little wider and talk about something that I didn't have an easy fit for otherwise. So yeah, that was, and we ended up doing 3 shows just on that, right? We did one for each miniseries.
I'm still really proud of that trilogy because I think there's just still nothing like I guess like 4 years on from completing it, there's just still nothing like it on the internet really.
Right.
I think I'm the most proud of those ones really, whatever they're about, you know.
Well, I mean, because the US House of Cards as well, like rose and fell so spectacularly in that period that it completely eclipsed the original series, which I still think is the definitive article. And it was great that we got Jack to come in and be the grown up as well for the 3rd episode.
That was very enjoyable. I learned a lot about Coriolanus in that episode. Thanks, Jack. If you're listening sincerely, that was great.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, we've done some long ones since then. We've done stuff where we've discussed, a few things. I mean, we're responsible for the 2 giants of the Stephen King anthology podcast, which, the first time we did that on Skeleton Crew, it broke the record for the longest episode. And then quite recently when we did it for Nightmares and Dreamscapes, it broke it again. So I hope you're happy.
I tell you what's really funny is the impact, especially of Nightmares and Dreamscapes, was so bad. I've just finished editing the 10th episode of my Bruce Springsteen podcast, which covers Nebraska, and we've got indie horror author Jasper Bark on the show with me and James talking about the Springsteen album Nebraska, and that ran over 3 hours. And I like to think part of the reason is because at one point, and this is entirely your fault, David, I started talking about how one of the songs reminded me of Crouch End.
Oh, that's amazing. But yeah, no, it's a pleasure to have you, and I'm really glad you could join us for the 5th anniversary. And
Sure.
With the themes of this, I wanted to ask you to talk about an episode of television. And after some agonizing over a WhatsApp group, you have gone with an episode of a show that we're both really, really keen on, feel very passionately about, and know well. That won't be the case for all of these, but this is one I know well and rewatched last night. And this is an episode of the HBO series Deadwood, and specifically an episode of the 3rd season of Deadwood. That is the episode, what's it called? A two-headed beast, which aired originally on the 9th of July, 2006. So it's actually nearly 20 years old, which is kind of a crazy thought.
Yeah.
Quick question, in the interest of staying succinct, because all these are going to be quite succinct, certainly by our standards. Don't have, we have great inclination, but not the time to talk about the whole of Deadwood and our feelings about the whole of it. I did just quickly wonder, I'm not actually sure when you first watched Deadwood. When was it roughly?
Well, that's a good question. So it would have been in the late 2000s. I didn't watch it on television. I'm not sure to what degree this got a UK broadcast. Certainly at the time that it would probably have been on Sky somewhere, and I didn't have Sky. I bought the DVD box sets. It was in the height of the DVD box set era. At this time, I had the first 3 or 4 seasons of 24 on DVD. I was starting, I think I bought the first 2 or 3 seasons of South Park. I've got the first 8 seasons of The Simpsons. Buying DVD box sets was just what I did. It's just one of the things that I did. I've got the complete Sopranos run, Battlestar Galactica from around this time as well, the reboot. And I mean, this is how kind of wild I got with that particular moment. I bought Deadwood without having seen it. I bought the first season box set, which would have been like a 30 quid box set probably on DVD, purely on the fact that it was HBO and it was the quality of the cast and what I'd heard about the original reviews. So yeah, I was watching this not on broadcast, obviously, but not long afterwards. It was still fairly current. It was current enough that I finished season 3 and then jumped online and was kind of devastated to discover that there wasn't going to be a season 4.
Yeah, and we might talk a little bit about that, especially as we talk about a season 3 episode.
Yeah.
I also watched it in the late noughties, also via DVD box sets, rental in my case, in my last year at university, 2008, 2009. Show had been over for a few years, so I came to it late as well, and more off a kind of cultural reputation rather than any like big like evangelical friend who got me into it or anything. It was more just a private process, I suppose. And then I watched it quite in my final year and became a passionate fan, and then sort of found people afterwards that were as well and talked about it, which I have done to you as well. I rather than talk about the entirety of Deadwood and what it means to you and kind of what you find in it and everything like that, because that's a whole other conversation, and maybe we'll regroup at a later date to talk about that kind of thing.
Yep.
I kind of wanted to zero in a little bit more and ask and we'll kind of assume general familiarity from people listening to this with Deadwood, although, you know, not everyone will, but maybe you'll get a taste of it from this. One thing to mention is we will be spoiling all these episodes. I'll probably put that at the beginning of this compendium, but there'll be spoilers for Two-Headed Beast in this, and indeed for Deadwood to this point. What is it about? What's the quality and kind of what the juncture, I guess, of Deadwood Series 3 for you? What does that? Why do you like that? And what's unique about it?
Yeah. So, I mean, let me first be honest that it was a bit of an arbitrary selection in terms of the episode, because I could have quite easily selected Suffer Little Children from season 1. I could have selected the episode with Wild Bill Hickok's poker game from season 1. The season 2 finale looms very large in my imagination, so I could have picked that. So I knew I wanted to pick an episode of Deadwood, but the selection of Two-Headed Beast, I have to be honest, is, as I say, is fairly arbitrary. I was fortunate to discover that Deadwood's currently on Paramount Plus, which I have a subscription to, so I was able to rewatch it. I might have had to pick a season 2 episode otherwise, because I can't find all my box sets, which is really embarrassing. But that said, knowing that I had the full choice, what do I like about season 3 of Deadwood? So what I like about Deadwood as a show is it's, and I'm not sure the degree to which the writers necessarily even understood this, although I think they understood it more than perhaps I would give other writers credit for. Deadwood as a whole is absolutely at its heart, as far as I'm concerned, about capitalism, and specifically it's about the men, and it is men, who drive capitalism. The lionized in conservative culture small business owners that in historical reality are normally the people who are most likely to aid the middle class slide into fascism when that starts to rear its head. And Deadwood kind of understands that, because it's set on a frontier. You have some really kind of violent confrontations with Native Americans occur in the first season in particular. It is about settler colonialism, and it's about what happens on the frontier and what it feels like, what it looks like. The pilot episode of the show is fascinating, and actually it's a weird one because it's not super representative, because by the end of season 1, you kind of think everyone in this show is a villain. Episode 1, sorry, you think everyone in the show is a villain, and it does take a few episodes for that to settle down and you to realize they're certainly all morally grey, but there are certainly shades of grey here. Some are darker than others. And I mean, the joke I always said about Deadwood was, at the end of the first episode, you think Al Swearingen is the devil. By the end of episode 3 or 4, you realize he's not, because the devil's moved in down the street, which is Cy Tolliver, who's, played by Powers Booth, just absolutely phenomenal. And we'll talk more about him in a minute, because he's a big part of this episode. But then by season 2, the legend of Hearst starts to appear. Hearst is this big, and I think he's a real life figure, right?
He is. George Hearst was a real
George Hearst,
a real senator eventually, I believe.
Yeah, of course he was. So George Hearst was, is this historical figure who everyone in the camp is terrified of, because he has this level of financial power, and he's linked to the Pinkertons, who are this incredibly corrupt kind of enforcement organization. And you realize that Cy Tolliver is also not the devil. He's the guy who goes down at the shop to buy the devil a packet of cigarettes.
So best.
Yeah. So given that, then part of what I love about season 3 is when the devil actually turns up, because season 3 is about Hearst and this figure who has lurked in the background, and just by the fact of his existence has cast a shadow over an entire season of the show and these characters. Suddenly he's there in the flesh with his terrifying enforcer, and his ambition to just take the things in the camp that he wants that he believes should be his, because he is wealthy and powerful. And it's brilliant, because in season 3 you basically see happen to the camp what the camp itself did to the native population off camera before the show started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it really is about, it's about how those people who think of themselves as badasses react when the real badass comes into town.
That's interesting about the settler thing of it. I hadn't really thought that Hearst is essentially trying to buy the camp for the equivalent of some beads,
Right. Well, it's trying to. I mean, specifically, it's the massive gold holdings, right? So, the season one, we have this woman who very quickly becomes a widower. Actually, I think that is Al's fault, right? She has her husband
Yeah,
killed.
it's very much
Yeah,
Al's fault.
yeah. He kind of kills her husband because he's got a decent gold claim. But anyway, she ends up with it, and they've kind of figured out an alliance. She's running a bank by season three, using the gold from the claim as the kind of collateral to underline the bank. But Hearst is there for the gold, and therefore he's there for her claim, and he really kind of doesn't care how he takes it. So yeah, there's definitely that feeling of like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of that line from Phantom Menace, right? There's always a bigger fish, but it's also, I think, what I like about it is it underlines for me kind of like just the inherent brokenness of that capitalist structure, you know. I mean, I don't know if it's going to make the show, but before we started recording, I was talking about, I just did a Springsteen show about the album Nebraska. Nebraska's an album written in the 80s, but it's all about economic forces. It's all about the way that people's lives get crushed. And there's a song on there called Highway Patrolman about a guy who becomes a police officer because he had to sell his family farm because wheat prices kept going up. And it's the thing about like, someone bought that farm and that will be big agribusiness and they will own that farm to this day. And like that's what capitalism does. A bigger fish comes along, it eats the smaller fishes, the people who do all the work, and then that gets consumed by yet a bigger fish. And it's kind of cannibalistic inherently. And I love how season three really rips the lid off that. And also how cleverly what it means the show does is it takes characters that, again, in the pilot, you kind of hate all of them. And then by the end of season two, you have at least a grudging respect for some of them. You still may not like any of them, but you have a certain grudging respect. By season three, you're almost on their side because although their characters haven't changed at all, they're still amoral, greedy, grasping bastards. Something scarier is now in town, and you kind of want that scarier thing to lose.
Season three, we're obviously most of the way through the story of Deadwood as it exists now, but the episode 5, A Two-Headed Beast, is almost halfway through season 3. And halfway through A Two-Headed Beast, a fight occurs.
Yeah.
And I think it would be silly for us to ignore the fact that this is that episode. Because, yeah, I mean, you say you picked it arbitrarily, but it's not unremarkable, is it? I mean, every episode of Deadwood is remarkable, but this in quality, but this is remarkable and will be remarkably remembered, I think, by a lot of people who've seen any Deadwood. I think we should probably not pretend we're not going to talk about the fight first, and we should talk about that. And then there's loads of other things I want to talk to you about in the episode, if we can squeeze them in. But I want to talk to you a bit about this.
I'm happy with that. The fight is why I picked the episode, hands down, because it's simply, well, let's start there. I think this is the best. And by the way, when I say best, what I mean is I think probably the most realistic depiction of hand-to-hand, genuine hand-to-hand Mortal Kombat I think I have ever seen on any show ever. It's my favorite fight scene of all time. And the reason it's my favorite is because it is incredibly brutal, incredibly visceral. There's none of this bullshit trading blows thrown through windows crap. I'm watching it again, actually, this time. I was struck by how short it is. It feels excruciatingly long because it's agonizing to watch, but actually it's not very long. And
it's
is
about
also
4.5 minutes start to finish,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and that is also realistic because it's like actually physical confrontations. They don't last very long in real life. They just can't. Because our bodies, can only take a limited amount of punishment before they just stop working. But I think I think for all those reasons, and again, in a show, because Deadwood as a whole show, a big part of what it's doing is undercutting the kind of Western myth every chance it gets and trying to expose like the ugly truth of what life was like in that time and place. And for me, arguably the best example of that is the fight that sits at the middle of Two-Headed Beast, which, as you know, sits at the middle of the episode, which is at the pivot point of the season. And the outcome of the fight as well is the pivot point for the entire rest of season 3, because it's Al's man versus Hearst's man. And because Hearst's man loses and because that pisses Hearst off, the entire die is cast for the second half of season 3. In fact, the episode ends with Al saying, the sheriff has cut off several of our options.
Yeah, little bits of the future, pathways to the future being closed off before their eyes.
Absolutely.
And plot lines being closed off. It's as always, Al is a bit of a sort of a Milch stand-in. This episode written by David Milch. I see, the incomparable David Milch.
I think almost all of them were, right? I don't know that there were many. I mean, there may have been people who did sort of polish rights and stuff, but my memory is that Milch wrote almost all of it.
At least in part. I mean, I can't get enough of the myth of David Milch, the sort of
No, me
lying
either.
on the floor dictating episodes half an hour before they were meant to be filmed and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It's all crazy and kind of both admirable and not anything I'd ever want to have to work anywhere near, at the same time as a lot of that stuff is.
You'd have to be as good as David Milch for it to be tolerable.
Yeah, but the product.
But he
that's come out of
was.
it-
So
Yeah,
what are
he
you going
was.
to do?
We should not see his like again. But it's on any level, and I think just the physicality of the Deadwood set as well. I said we wouldn't talk about Deadwood in general, but
Yeah.
let's focus on this episode. The way in which I suppose this set becomes an arena in this episode.
Oh yeah.
Complete with it's not an original observation, but Al and Hurst standing on the respective balconies like Roman emperors.
Oh my
They don't
God.
quite do the thumbs up, thumbs down thing, but there are moments like that.
Well, no, but you do get close-ups of Al's face, and it's definitely eyebrows up, eyebrows down, which coming from Al, it means the same thing. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, you're right about the set too. I mean, part of the reason that the show didn't make it a full season was because it was fantastically expensive. And the reason it was fantastically expensive was they built this fucking high street and they built the gem, and they are gigantic sets. And it's amazing. I mean, it's the mud alone, like the mud on the ground. I mean, there's a scene in this fight where they fall into a butcher's shop. It's not really a shop at all, right? It's just a shack. It's just a like a table by the side of the road with like a canvas sign over it, and they pile in through the like bleeding beef and offal and roll around in the mud. But I mean, yeah, it's extraordinary. It's absolutely incredible.
That's the thing is the fight has this isn't too far removed from like the Wild West of Laurel and Hardy in some ways, is it? This fight has comical aspect, because it's kind of on one level you could see on one level it's met two men who are very good at fighting, but as you say, it's so deglamorized that it's not exactly the Bridget Jones fight, but it is two men tumbling over each other, getting muddied, fighting a war of attrition. There's something of the sort of fast show, big long punch up kind of gag to it. But as you say, it doesn't stretch out too long, and you start to see the desperation and the phenomenal Dan Dorothy character. What a showcase for him, because that it starts to go not great for him quite quickly, but not so much that you think he's doomed. There's never there are several moments when you then think he's doomed, but there are ups and downs.
Well, and it gets fascinatingly, that gets foreshadowed, because immediately and by the way, I love this scene. Dan is prepping for the fight, having finally because let's set the scene as well briefly. The captain has called Dan out in the previous episode, called him scared, which is that's like a mortal insult. Also, like the captain's mutilated Al, right? Like they cut two of his fingers off.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting how Dan is like a protective lover in this?
Oh, 100%. And Dan's as angry about that, if not more, than he is about the insult to himself. And you see, I mean, Dan, there's a scene early on here where Al is trying to think through why the fight is happening. Why does Hurst want this? What does he stand to gain by it? And because he can't figure it out, he doesn't want to commit to action, which is a very Al kind of position to take. And Dan is almost in tears as he's recounting to Al, like, he cut your fucking fingers off, boss.
Yeah.
You have to let me do this. And there's a scene just before the fight where Dan is stripped his shirt off and he's rubbing grease all over his torso. And one of the other guys comes in and he says, Dan, if it looks like it's going south and you're going to lose, keep your head down and I'll just blow his fucking head off. And Dan whirls around on him like furious. As you do that, it'll be the last fucking thing you ever do. I've had plenty of times it's looked like it's going south, and I've come through. Like, and and he kind of predicts that, and it's not. I don't think Dan's pulling a rope-a-dope in this fight. I don't think it's that. I don't think he's trying to lull the captain into a sense of security. I think it does go
if
quite
this was
badly.
playing chicken, that would be high-risk chicken.
Been like, yeah. But it is seeded, right? We know that Dan's got that quality to him. Dan knows he has that quality. He has that self-awareness, which is fascinating.
Yeah, but he nearly drowns in that puddle. I mean, he really does. And it's kind of, he throws himself out of it just about partly due to... Actually, it's partly due to Captain Turner looking up to Hurst, isn't it?
That's right.
It's because of him being a little bit distracted by looking up for permission to end it, basically.
Well, and also because, and that's an interesting thing as well, because this comes back later in the episode and again echoes to the rest of the season. There's this whole thing about Hurst saying, He described at the start of it. Hearst says, "You remember that fight you had with so and so in that city? That was a hell of a fight." And the captains are like, "I don't remember that being a hell of a fight," meaning it wasn't hard work. And what Hearst says is like, "No, I mean it took a while."
Yeah,
If you understand what I'm saying. And the captain's like, "Oh, okay, I get you." So there's this whole thing about like make it last, and there's an inference from Hearst at the end of the episode that maybe that's why the captain lost, because Hearst had told him to make it last rather than end it quickly. So yeah, that's possible. But I love that moment you're talking about with Down to the Puddle, because there's a reaction shot on Ian McShane as Al, and it is absolutely heartbreaking because he just starts to look down, like he casts his eyes down, and you can see him just, he's out in public, so the mask is fully in place, and so there's very little movement. You can see he's just accepting the fact that his friend is just been is about to die in front of him, is about to be murdered in front of him, right?
For him,
at his behest, at his choice, as his champion, right? I mean, that's the thing you said about like Roman times. That's exactly what this is. This is a battle between two champions.
It's very medieval. And I mentioned to you today in messaging that, in 2014, when season 4 of Game of Thrones aired and the fight between the Mountain and the Viper happened, with a similarly ocularly traumatic
That's
ending.
true, yeah.
Then I thought back to Deadwood because I'd already seen the episode, and I talked to some people about who'd also seen Deadwood about the similarities and differences, because it's interesting, isn't it? That's a real quasi medieval thing where there are champions, trials by combat, etc., Mortal Kombat. In Game of Thrones, spoilers for season 4 Game of Thrones, the twist is that the good guy or relative good guy loses shockingly. I wondered if you might have thoughts about why it's so shocking that this is a fight where the nearest thing we have to a white hat wins, and it's still absolutely astonishingly brutal and horrifying.
Well, the white hat winning goes against the run of play in terms of the story, and really it feels in the moment like it's cutting against the narrative that it seems even by episode 5 of season 3 that Milch wants to tell, i.e. there's always a bigger fish and he will just fuck you up. Now, by the end of season 3, that's much more clear. And not that we're going to get into it, but the fact there isn't a season 4 is one of the great crimes of the modern era, as far as I'm concerned, because I'd love to have known Milch's original conception for how this was going to play out. But the point is, the end of season 3 is meant to be a downer. It's meant to be basically Hearst gets what he wants. But of course, you have to have valleys and troughs on the way through for that to feel right. And I think for me, it's the importance of the Dan-Al relationship. Like I say, that the key scene for me is a key shot for me in this fight is Al's downcast eye when he realizes his friend's about to drown, and then the way he glances back up, and it's incredible because his expression shifts only very slightly, only very subtly, but you can feel the man inside behind the mask just jumping up and down and punching the air and yelling his head off and screaming for joy that his friend isn't fucking dead and might win this fight. It's just, I mean, McShane is extraordinary throughout. It's his magnum opus. He's an amazing actor. He was finally given the part of his life. He grabbed it with both fucking hands and his teeth and went for it.
Astonishing, isn't it? I may have mentioned this on previous podcasts, but Ian McShane went to my high school. That's pretty cool.
No way! Wow.
Yeah, he's the most famous old boy from my high school, which is it's pretty cool, and a good footballer in his day. I've heard.
Okay.
Man United youth team, apparently.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. He's clearly in decent physical shape. But yeah, you're right. It is surprising that the white hat wins, and I think it plays with your expectations in that. And I think this is interesting. This is a writing thing that I've been thinking about recently. That's pertinent to a piece I'm doing. As a writer, if you know the good guy's going to win in a scenario like this, or the relative good guy, for a given value of etc., you actually are free to go more brutal than you otherwise would, because you know how it's going to play out. So you can really sell those terrifying moments when it looks like it's all going to go wrong, because the audience doesn't know and you do. So you give them the maximum, because I think at that point as a writer, you get the most juice from giving the audience the biggest scare you possibly can. Now, you can only achieve that if the audience knows you might pull the trigger. So you have to have established that fact. And by this point, again, season 3, episode 5, we know no one's safe.
Yeah. It's a double scare, isn't it? Because when Dan's nearly drowned, and then he's having his head bashed against a rock, and you kind of he's not going to walk away the same man, even if he does win somehow. And it's and that's happening, and then you see that absolutely primal look of terror but fixation in Dan's face as he goes for the for the eye.
As he goes to the eye.
You used the phrase Mortal Kombat, and that could have a K, couldn't it? Because this is
Sure.
they basically give him a fatality. And I was thinking, and I still haven't seen anything quite like this, and you could argue about the the how convincing the effect is. I don't know what that looks like in real life, and I hope neither of us ever have to find out. But but the thing is, it's not a fatality. It's like Turner is on the ground screaming. It takes another blow from Dan's stick to quieten him, and even then he's not dead. It's then that the killing blow is decided upon.
And one of the many things I love about it is that you see Dan having to draw on all of his reserves of physical strength just to deliver that killing blow. He is so exhausted by the end of the 4.5 minutes, he almost doesn't have the strength to finish it. The physical
he almost falls
strength.
over with the log, doesn't he? As he actually smashes his head in.
And it's a huge log. And interestingly as well, in a fight that is otherwise so graphic, because we do actually see the guy's eye get popped out, or we think we do. I mean, it's very, very cleverly edited, but it looks like you do. And certainly we see him in graphic detail, as you alluded to, with his eyeball hanging out, screaming his head off. It's very interesting to me that the coup de grace is not depicted. And I don't think that's any squeamishness on Milch's part, because he didn't have any squeamishness as far as I could tell as a writer. So that's a deliberate decision. It was a deliberate choice to not show the coup de grace, to show Dan rear up for it. But when it comes down, actually, the camera goes back to Al, it goes back to McShane. And then you see him look across at Hurst.
Yeah.
And you're back to the two warring generals, who walks back through the hole in the wall that he had made. And I agree with you about the fatality. The other thing that I think is so important about that moment is it is a moment of, it's a moment of quote unquote dirty fighting from Dan, right? It's the equivalent of biting, or because there's a moment actually before the fight where it's like, I can't, what's the name? I can't remember the name of the other guy, but he turns to Al, he's like, well, he's got an advantage over you because Dan's got long hair. He's got shoulder length.
Johnny's saying that, yeah.
That's right, yeah. And Johnny says he's got an advantage over you there because you've got, he's got that really short hair. You're not going to be able to grab his hair. So it's not like there's rules in this fight, but the fact that he goes for the captain's eye is really significant, because it's not. It is an act of desperation. It's a moment of it's him or me, but it's always been him or me. He always knew that. So there's something else kind of going on under the hood there with Dan. Is he crossing some personal internal line maybe to do this? But the other fascinating thing is the captain's response, because he completely loses his shit. He just screams. He's terrified. He's crawling along on the ground and his eyes hanging out, and he's just screaming. And he's the fight's over because he can't fight anymore. And it struck me that the captain had probably never been hurt before, really hurt, seriously hurt. He'd obviously been punched, he'd obviously taken blows, but clearly he had a high pain threshold. Something about being in a situation where he was actually, a life-altering injury occurred, and that's it. He's gone.
It's a sort of they don't like it up them kind of
yeah,
moment. Yeah,
exactly. The guy's been a bully his whole life, and he's been the biggest, scariest bully you can possibly imagine, and he's won every single fight he's ever been in. And that's it. And now suddenly he's actually been mortally hurt, and that's it. He falls apart. Whereas Dan, you get the impression, has really been through some shit, right? Dan has clearly taken some beatings on his way up.
Yeah. Definitely. And the aftermath of the fight is just staggering as well, isn't it? The way that Dan walks back, he's covered in mud. He's covered in mud like Arnie at the end of Predator, and he he walks back to the gem, and he's in seclusion, and Johnny goes to visit him, and he's asked if he wants whiskey. He's asked if he wants women, who apparently are queuing up to comfort him, and celebrate him as the champion. And it's and he just wants to cry, really, doesn't he?
And he's just sat there naked, crying, just saying, fuck off, leave me alone. And he won't let the doc see him either. And the doc gives them a list of symptoms to look out for. Because the doc has this great line about something like broken bones, splintering or piercing vital organs is what I'm fucking worried about.
Isn't it great? And if you just rewatch an episode of Deadwood at random, and it's one where Brad Dourif shows up, isn't it just fantastic?
Yes. He's so amazing. He's so amazing. And I think by this point in season 3, he's kind of, we know he's was he got tuberculosis or something? I think so. Al calls him a lunger, right? It's just the line that Al uses, a typical kind of Al language. But yeah, it's a great scene, because it's great because the doc is clearly scared out of his mind that Dan's got some injury that he doesn't know about, because he's obviously seen this shit before. He knows how it can play out. But what's fascinating to me, there's no question that he's going to go against Dan's instruction not to go in that room. right?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and also Al's not going to go in the room. I love that moment when Johnny's like, boss, do
oh,
you want to go see him? And
that's the
Al's just like,
best.
no, you have to, some road. Was it, how does he put it? Like some roads you got to walk alone, or it's not that cheesy.
Well,
But it's
no, it's really good because like he's like, don't you want to go and see him? Like, I feel like you'd be a comfort to him, and I was like, no, I fucking wouldn't. He's going through. He said like, actually, the line he has is like when you. He said it's different when you just kill someone, but if you have to kill someone in a fair fight, which is a circumstance Dan and I try very hard to avoid.
yeah. I think he says it's just him and you, and it's just him and you, and then just death.
And you see the light go out their eyes, and it's just you. And it sits, and it basically says it sits with you, and you need to take your time. You need your space. Like, he knows where I am.
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen Al kill people,
right? And we know that Al knows what he's talking about there too. Well, he almost kills Bullock at the start of season 2.
He does, yeah.
About that, like, very nearly.
Similarly in the mud, after a protracted scuffle, it's not
in the mud in the street.
It's
Actually,
that
one they do go through a window, which is more traditional. But then they end up, both of them, really injured for like the rest of the season. So that's the other thing I like about the show. It kind of keeps that, it's more realistic about that.
No, it definitely does. Well, I mean, in the interest of brevity, moving on from the fight, but we'll come back to it. But just a couple of other things in this episode I want, because obviously any episode of Deadwood, this is reminding me actually, any episode of Deadwood you pick, all human life is here, literally.
100%.
You look around, all the characters, it's so good to be back in this town. You just see everyone passing by, and you come. It's kind of a joy watching a middle of the season episode at random like this, because you do come in the middle and you have to remind yourself, and there's all sorts of stuff going on. It's almost too big to talk about, really. So I want to come back to maybe Alma at the end, because I think that really struck me this episode. It really sort of stunned me, actually. But you get to see Merrick, writing a story about investment opportunities at Alma's bank, and then discussing it with Blazanov afterwards. You get to see to many Deadwood fans, slightly inexplicable troupe of actors led by Brian Cox.
Oh my God, yeah,
being joined by their elderly dying member of the troupe, and
so wonderful.
We were laughing today when one of the scenes is just about them like resolving committee membership for the theatre company, which is just, I mean, so extraordinary. An episode not only where this fight happens, but is in the centerpiece of the episode, and then you get that as well.
Just to be clear to the listeners, how funny that is. They're deciding who are going to be the committee members for this theatre, and there are 4 of them in total.
Well, we're both in unions.
Shut up.
We can edit that. But there's so much going on. I was even just delighted when there's the brief scene with Trixie and Sol. Because you sort of forget about Sol and Trixie's relationship, and that wonderful line where they've just been bickering, and she's been talking to him, and she's like, "I suppose you want to get fucked." He's like, "Yes, please."
Yeah.
Just as the most cheery man in the world.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's beautiful. I mean, it was one of those things where rewatching it last night, I was like, oh shit, I need to do the whole thing again, don't I? Because this is just, they're so fantastically well realized, and it is wonderful jumping in, because like you say, you get the snapshot. Because the other big story, actually, it's the end of someone's story in this episode. It's not just the captain; it's Hostetler, right? And and that's, in its own way, I think is as shocking conclusion as the fight. And unlike the fight, it comes really out of left field, enough that I think, because I picked the episode because of the fight. I'd forgotten that also happened in this episode.
Me too.
Completely.
And then I sort of realized we were in the middle of it, and I was like, this can't be where that ends as well, can it? And then it was. Yeah.
And that's just extraordinary, because if you want to talk about like a scenario where you're playing out like, the kind of lived experience, but also like the inescapability of that kind of institutional racism, because that's really what that kind of sequence is about, right? You've got this guy Hostetler, who's a black man who owned the livery. He was away, he came back, someone else took it over. He's agreed to sell it to the guy who took it over, even though he didn't want to. They had a blackmail sign that they forced this guy to write because he'd done something fairly heinous.
Yeah.
And then, so this is the thing: the deal's done, right? Hostetler, the black former owner, he's got his money, he's got his gold, he's ready to leave town, but the white guy won't let him go until he gives him back the sign, and they can't find it, and they cannot find it, and then eventually they do find it, and it's been wiped clean already, because it was written in chalk on a chalkboard, and the passage of time and where it was hidden, it got wiped. And the guy, it's amazing, because the white guy has bought the stuff, he just won't believe it. And you realize at a certain point, it's not really that he doesn't believe it. It's that he knows he's still got leverage and he just can't stop himself from pushing.
Yeah. Struck me as very modern, this plotline, actually.
Yeah.
This is like social media in Deadwood.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the moment when Hostetler just realizes, like, I am literally never escaping this.
Yeah.
And it's also the despair of, like, I came that close. I had the bag of gold in my fucking hand, but I couldn't make it out of town. I just could not.
And I've just been through this, I've been through living in this race in this country for
right,
50 years at this point, however old he says to me. And it's actually struck me, I don't know if you can say Milch is having fun. I guess Milch is having fun with the whole show, but like,
yes,
it sort of struck me as, you talk about subverting Western tropes, and obviously there's a lot of that in Deadwood, and playing around with them and investigating them and tunneling under them. This struck me as almost like playing over the course of a whole season or two, arguably, with what would be comic supporting plot lines in other things.
Yeah.
Because it sort of is. It's disturbing. It's got dark edges to it, especially with Steve's racism. But like, it sort of is this is the silly B plot or even C plot. And then it ends with someone blowing the brains out,
But you know what I mean? You know what I think, though? I think it's the comic support slot in the same way that it's the quote unquote comic support slot in a fucking Shakespeare play. Like, it's funny, but it means something. And like it goes hard because it's Deadwood. Everything in Deadwood goes hard. I mean, there's scenes with. I mean, one of the few people who isn't in this episode, which almost made me not pick it, is we've got no Calamity Jane, which is a travesty because she's one of the all-time greats in this show. But a lot of her stuff is funny, and is sort of played for laughs to a degree. But she's also like. I mean, the pathos in that character is extraordinary, and in a kind of character arc is really extraordinary. So yeah, I think it kind of, I think some of it is playful us, but I think what I love about that particular moment in this particular episode, it's like, it feels to me like what Milch as a writer is saying is like, even the funny shit isn't really funny because it's all real. And that because like you say, you hear the gunshot and Timothy Oliphant as Bullock comes out and sees you with him see just the blood stain on the wall, and you realize what's and the shotgun, I think, is just in the front of the shot, and you're like, oh my God. Also,
this is already, I mean, Bullock's always a man in a bad mood, but this has been a bad day already, and arguably a bad year, and his son died in the previous series. Spoilers.
That's right.
And he's already angry at Hearst. He's already seen the Cornish, or the latest Cornish employee die. And he's on the warpath. And actually, I kind of want to bring that back briefly because you mentioned Cy Tolliver before, and he is in this episode. And you could argue that Cy Tolliver's become a bit of, I know there's some fans who think he's a bit of a redundancy by the time you get to season 3, because for all the reasons you claim, like, he's been eclipsed, he's been shown to be a small fish in a small pond, really. But he is in this, and he's in this at the end as well when he's in it a few scenes, but he's in it at the end when Hearst goes drinking and then Bullock shows up. And I just wondered if you had anything to say about that scene, not even just in terms of Cy, but just how that resolves. I
mean, it's a fantastic scene. Powers Booth gives one of the all-time, again, I think he gives a lifetime great performance, and that's a guy who did a lot of amazing work. But I think, like McShane, he realized what Deadwood was and what the writing enabled him to do, and he just grabs it with both hands. Again, one of the episodes that was on my shortlist was Suffer Little Children from season 1, and that's absolutely a Powers Booth kind of masterclass. He really, the way he strips away the layers of the character of Cy Tolliver, and you get to see them all in turn, just amazing. But no, I love him in this. I love how furious he is about everything, and the thing about Tolliver as a character is he's really terrifying because he's always angry, and his rage is literally murderous. It's like with Tony Soprano, there's always that edge when Tony's on screen where it's like, this guy could just snap.
He's a bit of a dark mirror of, I've never ever thought about this before, but he's a bit of a dark mirror of Bullock, isn't he? Everyone talks about him as a dark mirror of Al, or like an inferior version of Al.
Yeah.
He's sort of, it's almost more like Al's stuck in a town with these two angry men, both of whom are a risk to business as usual in a way that he isn't,
Yeah, both of whom Al somehow has to figure out a way of navigating and trying to get on side, or at least not be at cross purposes with. No, I think that's exactly right. I think the only difference between the two, frankly, is that Bullock's overriding, and I love this about Bullock, he's such an amazing character, and he shares this trait with the version of Wild Bill Hickok that you have in season 1 of the show. His overriding, overarching, driving force behind all of his anger, and it's not noble. He just hates bullies. he hates bullies with such a bone deep kind of aggression that he will literally kill them. I mean, like, it's not, and there's nothing noble about it. There's nothing like all this stuff about like law and order and all that shit. It's nothing to do with that. He detests bullies so much he literally cannot control his anger.
Arguably hates himself quite a lot as well. That's in there
that's true. Yeah, that's obviously part of it. And he cannot control his anger, and he's very, very skilled with a pistol. And of course that comes because you're right. Like the build up to the scene the build up to the confrontation scene is fantastic because you see him already. He's in the bank and he's losing his fucking mind because the Cornish, another union organizer has been stabbed and been left out, and it's such a blatant disregard for what's going on. And I think I'm trying to remember who it is. My memory is that it is Al who's saying, "Please, please, please, just don't go over there." Or maybe it's Al's men, but it's like just not yet. Just give me a few minutes.
Al asks for a reprieve, and then the men sort of reinforce it, and Bullock's like,
"That's it." Bullock says,
"Basically, I can give you like half a day."
Yeah, no. What I love is he says, "I have the smallest bit of business to attend to."
Yeah,
the slightest bit, and what I love about the show is like this is Milch. He's so great, like, and that's true. But the small bit of business he's got to deal with is, of course, overseeing the sale of the livery, which leads to the suicide. So by the time he comes back into the bar, he is so angry.
That's funny. It's almost like he went off to like take a deep bath, like to have and stuff, and instead that happened. Didn't he?
Yeah. So like, it not only did it talk about delay the inevitable, it made it worse. And Hearst is drunk, right? He's drunk in the Belly Union, which is the rival saloon to the Gem, which is run by Tolliver. Tolliver's down there, and that's the other thing I love about Powers Booth's performance. He is absolutely fucking terrifying, but also when he tries to be as sequious as he does with Hearst frequently, with Hearst man in season 2, it's even worse because he can't do it. Like, he knows the mechanics of what he's supposed to say, but his voice and his demeanor is always this kind of gravelly, growly, scary, because he's just this awful fucking person. Do you know what I mean?
Even his obsequiousness sounds really threatening, doesn't it?
Yeah, because to his core, he just is. Yeah, he's incapable of anything other than anger, really.
Which is hilarious and scary.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a wonderful scene with Hearst because he's clearly, Tolliver is clearly terrified of Hearst. He will do almost anything to appease him. And that reminds me of a Stephen King line, I think, from Needful Things about, I think he's talking about Ace Merrill, which is the bad guy from The Body, and he comes back in Needful Things as a grown-up, and he says, like, the only instinct in a bully like Ace, stronger than the instinct to dominate others, is the instinct to roll on their back and expose their belly when the real bad guy turns up.
Isn't it weird though? Like, even before Hearst is thrown in jail, as the episode ends, he's sort of slumming it, isn't he? And it's kind of in trauma from Captain Turner dying and from his political defeat, I suppose. It's like, but it almost reminds me of like this has just come to mind, like in Seven when John Doe's like, I wanted to like walk amongst normal people and taste of normal things, and kind of live the life of a normal man. It's almost like he's staggered down to the Bella Union, whether drunk already or not, like to feel like a normal man. Like, 'cause even when Bullock comes in, he insults him like any loudmouth at a bar would. It's not particularly. I guess it's slightly more poetic and artful, as Milch's words tend to be. But he's kind of like yelling at him like any nuisance drunk would, and that's how Bullock gets him as well. And he just says, "Are you drunk?" And he is. But it's like a man. He's being touchable in a way that Hearst hasn't been. But it's like he's decided to. No one made him go down there.
Yeah, and it is an interesting thought, but also I think equally, he's wearing the invisible armor of the fact that he's Hearst, and he knows that he can. And actually, he's telling ultimately, and he does in these words, he tells the sheriff to go fuck himself because he knows he can, and he's very annoyed and surprised to be led away by the ear, which is what happened, like literally dragged out of the bar by the ear, because Bullock has just had one of the worst days he's had in a long time, and he's done a lot of bad days, and fuck this guy, and it's great.
I noticed this episode that Dan's been attacked on the ear earlier in the episode. Captain Turner bites his ear.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point. And I was talking earlier about tactics that are kind of unseemly even in that kind of a fight. And that's the first moment where Turner, makes it clear that if you were in any lingering doubts as to whether or not there were any rules to this fight, there are not, sir. No, the rule is not die. But yeah, I love that. I love because what I love is Oliphant's performance, because he's so fucking angry. There was this site called Television Without Pity that used to do these recaps of these shows, and they would invent nicknames for the characters, and their nickname for Bullock was Clench, which I absolutely loved, because that just sums up. And it is like the way he delivers the line, "Did you just tell me to go fuck myself?" is just fantastic. It is just like you kind of think he's maybe going to just rip him apart with
Or
his
just
bear.
shoot him through the head.
Yeah, or something like that. And when he drags him off by the ear, it's almost like that's some self-control there, Bullock. I'm almost impressed.
Yeah, because I suppose if you're a US history nerd, Hearst has plot armor, doesn't he? In a way, because the show's not going to go full Inglourious Bastards. It's but if you don't know much about Hearst as I didn't, I was like, maybe this is how Hearst dies.
Sure. Yeah, sure. And I mean, the show plays with those expectations a couple of times, doesn't it? Because we have Wild Bill Hickok in season 1, and you have Wyatt Earp turns up in season 3, right, later on, and you're like, I wonder how this is going to go. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting for me. I didn't know who Hearst was either when I first watched it, but I knew enough both about the way that the characters reacted to him and their knowledge of him, and kind of by that stage, I think even the way Milch saw him within the kind of hierarchy of the show, that there was clearly no real danger to Hearst. And it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Like, I mean, if you really want to get into metatextual stuff, like why doesn't someone just put a bullet in Hearst's head?
Particularly now that Captain Turner's gone.
Yeah, and it's because of the power that Hearst represents, but it's also how he projects that power in the world, because men like that exist. They exist in the modern era, and they don't get shot in the head. And the reason they don't get shot in the head is kind of because everyone's too scared to.
Well, not often.
Not often enough, I might say. But yeah, no, you're right.
And that's how you complete a relay race.
Look, we get the odd good moment, right? You get the odd Mussolini hanging from a lamppost, but it's fairly unusual.
Well, I also wanted to mention that the way that Bullock realizes that, or is told that Hearst is at the Bella Union, is EB.
Oh God, no! I'm so glad you mentioned that, because EB, we don't see much of EB. He gets 2 scenes in this, and he steals them both because he's fucking amazing, right? Like he's one of the best. I mean, this is a show.
Rich is inclined to call him the best character in television history. Rich, if you're listening,
it's very, very hard to argue with that. Really, it's a perfectly defensible position. EB's absolutely incredible. The performer's incredible, and the 2 scenes he has in this are phenomenal. The first one with Al, where he's trying to pump Al for information, and Al just pumps him dry for information about Hearst, and then sends him away explicitly not telling him a goddamn thing. It is glorious.
Although, do you know, EB? I was I didn't do a full rewatch today, but I just was watching the middle bit of the episode, and EB's the last person that Al speaks to before he makes the decision for Dan to fight Captain Turner.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
We could debate for hours what Al gets from knowing EB Farnham, but he gets something.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I love the fact that EB kind of does articulate it in that scene earlier on when he's talking to the men, and he's like, I always thought we were friends. I'm really sorry that this guy moving into my hotel, I had no choice about it, by the way. And
he says the thing of like, I miss having coffee with you guys.
Yeah,
I miss our coffees in the morning.
I miss their morning coffees. Yeah, it's so great.
It's so sweet. Great. But also like EB's ridiculous sort of pantomime thing of like I could not possibly tell you where Hearst is. And like sort of right.
That's what I love. Yeah, when he does that twice. So in the scene with Al, as he's leaving, having given Al all the information and gotten nothing out of Al, he turns through the open door and says, "Always happy to a bit of service, Al. Always happy to give counsel," like as a performance to the men, fooling nobody, like including himself, right? And then he does it again, as you say. Bullock comes storming in, like, where's Hearst? And he does this whole, I could not possibly tell you, scribble, scribble, scribble. Where?
Yeah,
valued customers.
He's the cleverest man in his own play, isn't he? And no one else.
He's amazing because he's such a worm. But he knows he is, and he's even frustrated by his own kind of invertebrate nature.
Yeah, he really is.
But he's also powerless before it. He's the ultimate kind of, in that sense, he kind of is the ultimate kind of Shakespearean clown / comedy character. And like them, he's a deeply tragic human being. I mean, there's this, I could have picked the episode, I couldn't remember which one it was, but there's an episode where he has an entire, I think, 4-minute monologue whilst scrubbing blood from the floor, and he's on his own. He's talking to himself, and it's just fucking glorious.
Not even Richardson in that position. He's just great. Well, on this watch of this episode, I mean, picked it for the fight. We've talked the fight a little bit.
Yep.
There's loads of other great highlights in the episode. The scene that I loved watching this, and I remembered it existing in principle, I suppose. Like I remembered that something like this happened. Certainly not in this episode. My favorite scene in this episode, the most notable one is the fight, I think, is the one between Alma and Ellsworth. And I just wanted to key that up slightly by saying that when I started watching this episode, I think it was the scene in the bank earlier in the episode when Alma is, conducting first doing the interview, and then she's conducting the business to do with Stephen Hostetler.
Yep.
Those two scenes, I was like, this performance seems a little strange. And I was like,
yeah.
Oh,
she's
this
high
is one
again.
of the laudanum bits. Like this is because if her fans will know, she's kind of up and down throughout the series at various stages. She's either on drugs or coming off them, or getting clean, and this is a relapse phase basically. And she's also married in a sort of respectful but essentially loveless marriage of convenience to this guy Ellsworth, who's a prospector, and it's a marriage of business convenience and of honor basically, and to hide some indiscretions and
a protection. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he's brilliant. He's brilliant too.
Yeah, he is. I was just going to say, I mean, we do get a scene earlier on actually where we learn for sure that she's on it, because the junkie who works at the Bella Union confesses to Cy in one of those great Cy just bullies the shit out of someone until they tell him stuff scenes, right? That he's been supplying her with laudanum, so we know that she's No, and I agree with you. It's an amazing scene.
You start to notice their performance throughout there. I think you get those two scenes. Obviously, they're doing other things with the plot, but you get those two scenes to sort of set up that she's in this state, and then of course you see her. I don't know what the phrase would even be for that, but shooting up again, basically.
Yeah, you see her taking the laudanum, drinking it, right?
Yeah, that's right, and then you see her start to react to that, But then the whole sequence with Ellsworth in his bath and her sort of coming into him at the door and like threatening to go in. Again, it's kind of. That first bit is played for laughs a bit because he's so nervous at her sort of sexual, even the hint of her sexual forwardness and sort of affection, that he hurries out of his bath, quickly and gets out,
Also, though,
it's something so heartbreaking.
Think about how that scene, and this scene occurs very near the end of the episode, and think about how it's a mirror of the opening scene of the episode, where you've got the guy and the woman from the brothel in the bath.
Oh yeah, that ridiculous scene with Con Stapleton at the beginning.
That's right, which is a kind of inverted version of that scene, right?
Yeah,
where where the woman's in the bath and the guy, but also because he's very kind of happy in his kind of sexual desires, and clearly in that, and later on in the scene, Ellsworth is clearly deeply uncomfortable with the whole situation. Yeah, I mean, I love that mirroring. I think that's really smart. Ellsworth's a great character. I know it's weird. I mean, this is a stupid thing to say. I'd kind of forgotten about Ellsworth because he's not.
Yeah.
He's not as larger than life as so many of the Deadwood characters are.
And it's funny because when I think back to, I think he's in the pilot episode, we're going way back, and he actually is the sort of rootin' tootin' prospector who almost acts like a cartoon prospector at the very start. He kind of he's yelling and he's swearing and he's talking about getting gold nuggets, and he's kind of he's not that broad, but he's he's one of the more archetype characters. There's a lot of archetype characters to start with in Deadwood, and he turns into this, or is revealed as this incredibly gentle, caring, careful man.
Yeah, and he's taken on. I mean, that's again, we're assuming spoilers, right? So the reason that he's married Alma is because she got pregnant with Bullock, and then Bullock's wife and kid turned up. Mm-hmm. So she was going to have a kid. She wasn't going to abort it. So Ellsworth is, raising another man's child, knowing that's what he's doing. And at the same time, he's also offers a degree of protection to Alma because of the gold concerns that she owns. Something that I'm sure won't come back to haunt him before the season's over, given Hearst's anger. But yeah, it's an incredible scene because I love how it's all part of Alma's arc, is going back on the laudanum becomes inevitable because of the tragedy of the stuff that she's dealing with. And
the isolation of it, the loneliness of it.
Yeah, the isolation, the loneliness of it, the fact that Bullock is there in camp, but she can't have him and he can't have her, and that relationship can't be what it needs to be. And, the fact that before this, she's had a confrontation with Hearst where Hearst has tried to threaten her or bully her into selling her claim, and she didn't want to do it. And so, she her vulnerability is real. It's not perceived, and she knows that. What I love about the scene is it's one of those scenes where there aren't any villains in this scene. She gets high and basically tries to sleep with Ellsworth because she's lonely and she's married to him and she's high and she wants to get laid. And Ellsworth, God bless him, like, first he's completely flummoxed, and then when he comes out and she starts coming on to him, there's the line, it breaks my heart, when she's smoothing his hair down and she sort of leans in like she's going to kiss him, and he says, I guess it'd be unmanly if I were to faint.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the way he says it, the way he delivers a line, like his voice is trembling, like he literally can't believe this is happening.
There are like four pivots in that scene, all so
Yes.
earned and also spellbinding. I think the when you kind of go to Ellsworth's perspective and she's been kissing him and then she pulls away and it seems like it takes an eternity, but
Oh,
he realizes how high she is, or that she's high
yeah.
in general, and then how high she is, and her look of sort of beatific just surrender there.
Yeah.
I think that's. I was recently reading an article about sort of how to act drunk, and it was all the sort of maybe useful, maybe not cliches of like, oh well, maybe you should try and act sober because that's what drunk people try to do. They try to act sober.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah.
thinking of that in that moment. She's well past that, but I was like,
Yes.
that might be some of the best acting in Deadwood, and that is a crowded field. You know?
Yeah. It's an amazing scene, but they're both amazing because you're right. The other thing that's great is seeing Ellsworth's dawning realization. And the reason it takes so long, I think, is because it's so crushing. Because he is going on a journey from, oh my God, she actually does like me and I'm actually going to have a physical relationship with this amazingly beautiful woman who I married for convenience, blah, 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 to, oh no, she's fucking high.
Yeah.
This is not. And also,
well,
the
she's
thing about,
she's high, and not only is that soul crushing, but it's dangerous for her and it's dangerous for Sophia.
yeah. Yeah, and but also the way that his own internal morality immediately crashes in, and he's like, well, that's because like you could write a version of that scene where it goes differently, right? You could write a version of that scene where Ellsworth says, well, fuck it, I don't care, she's high, okay, at least I'm going to get my end away, like. But that's not
and
even.
You could claim ignorance in the morning as well.
Yeah, or whatever, right? Or yeah, or whatever. But it's what I love about that scene is, and again, it's all. And when I say it's all in the performance, I mean without a word being spoken, it's all in the fucking performance. It's all in his face. It is clear that it is not. That possibility isn't even in Ellsworth's internal landscape.
And he doesn't hit her. He doesn't yell at her. He doesn't,
No.
Which a lot of men of that, well, any era would do.
Right.
Of that era, he leaves firmly and talks about the care of Sophia. And even he's not even that mean to when she says she'll pick Sophia up because he's scared that she won't do it. He doesn't even take it off her. He just says, "Don't forget," pointedly.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. Yeah. And then he's kind of choked. That's the only time you get that kind of choked emotion in his voice, right? I mean, fucking hell, what a masterclass. And also, like, I mean, everything about it, the acting we've rhapsodized about at length, and it is fantastic, but also the writing. And there's a lesson there about writing screenplays for people who can act, right? How little you need to put in the script and how much the performers will bring to the scene.
Yeah.
I
bet David Milch woke up in a pretty good mood. Well, God knows what state he woke up in at the start of season 1 of Deadwood. I bet he was flying high. But at the start of season 2 of Deadwood, I bet he was really flying high because he knew who he had. He knew who was on the
team. Absolutely. No, he assembled this just incredible. And like you say, I mean, it's a good point that you make. If I have very few kind of negative criticisms of Deadwood. I think, well, it's my favorite TV show of all time, so it'd be weird if I didn't like it. The nearest thing I can come to is how hard the first episode goes to sell you on how fucking horrible the people are. It's really interesting. Even the doc appears to be a kind of amoral freak in the first episode because he's obsessed with getting a cadaver and examining the injuries and stuff. And the way he acts it, he kind of overacts that kind of, sweaty, peering over the top of the glasses kind of character. It's very interesting how tonally the show not completely abandons, but pivots from that point, literally from episode 2 on, and suddenly you're dealing with much more rounded human beings. It's a very odd. It's almost like Milch wants to slap you in the face as hard as he possibly can in the first episode. With like, this is the past, and these people are all horrible, and the circumstance is horrible, and it's bloody, and it's violent, and it's nasty, and they're amoral, and it's disgusting, and it's scary. And then he allows the humanity to kind of slowly bleed in over the next sort of few episodes until, as you say, by the time you get to season 3, you have a scene like this where, I mean, season 1, episode 1 Ellsworth is unrecognizable, really. Mm-hmm. And it's not that he's not the same character and it's not internally consistent. It's that the layers of the character have revealed themselves over the course of the seasons. I mean, maybe in his particular case, Milch realized what an actor he had on his hands and that he could do that. I mean, maybe that is part of it. Some kind of metatextual stuff going on. But oh my God. And you're right. I mean, if you think about this, it's got the best, for a given value, of best fight in television history.
Yeah. High up there, certainly.
And it's got the suicide of Hostetler, which is so shocking and so left field. And like you say, it's a comedy, except the punchline isn't funny. It's heartbreaking and horrific. You've got the arrest of Hearst, which again, by this point, if you've been watching this, you have 5 episodes of saying, why doesn't somebody just fucking kill this guy? Why doesn't somebody? And you're finally seeing him at least being hurt, and you're thinking yes. Except that gets completely undercut by the very last line of the episode, where Al's looking down, thinking, oh shit, we're fucked. All of that, and as you say, you have this scene, and you're just like,
yeah,
it's just operating on a level that most television, most cinema can't get anywhere near.
And they've carved out space for this scene, and it feels organic. And Alma's been in these other scenes, and she's intertwined with the town, and the town is intertwined with her. It's all connected.
Yeah, and you just think like, I mean, that's it. And then you think, well, how fucking good is this show? Exactly. And the answer is, in my opinion, well, it's the best.
Yeah, almost infinitely good, I would say. Well, thank you for bringing that to talk to me about. That was really appreciated, and I'm going to really struggle to not just start watching the whole season this week.
Yeah, me too.
Like, carry on from there, or maybe from the beginning again. Who knows? I wanted to say quickly, as I've been asking people on these, firstly, I guess, and you've mentioned some already in our chat, but like, if you, and I know this is arbitrary and it is really difficult as one of your favorite show, but like, if you were to like this in isolation, offer another episode of Deadwood up to people, if you had to pick one other than this, what would it be?
I mean, if I just had to pick one other than this, it's really difficult. I mentioned 2 before, Suffer Little Children for season 1, which I think is the darkest single episode of the show.
It's another very Cy Tolliver one.
A very Cy Tolliver heavy show.
The biggest Cy Tolliver one, really.
I think it is. I think it's the big. I think it's the Cy Tolliver kind of tour de force episode. But it also is very revealing about Al and other characters. And again, if you're talking about the darkness, I don't think it gets any darker than that. So that one would be on my list. Yeah. And the other one is the season 2 finale. But I think the trouble with recommending the season 2 finale is you kind of need to watch season 2 because I don't think it works in isolation. So I'd probably have to say, if it's not this one, it's Suffer Little Children. But fundamentally, you watch any episode of this show and from any point of it, and I defy you not to want to go back to the beginning and watch the whole goddamn thing, because it's just the thing is that it came out at that golden era of television as it was just cresting with the kind of Sopranos, and it was that notion of like you could do what previously had been done in novels, you could now do on TV with these big overarching storylines, and it felt like, I mean, a season of Deadwood felt like a 10 or 12 hour movie. Mm-hmm. It's movie quality acting, it's movie quality set design and I mean special effects, not that they're a huge amount, but they are,
and the writing and the stylization of the writing. I suppose that's the thing that would set it apart
mother of
from
God, the writing,
even things as good in almost every other respect.
I mean, the writing's better than anything you get in cinema. The writing's just next level, and you get these incredible stories taking place over these, this long arc. So you get to live with these characters, you get to see them develop, and the seasons take part in quite truncated time periods as well. They're not long, there's no kind of Battlestar Galactica 5 years later shit. Like, it's just, there's I think there's weeks between the seasons. I think it's as short a period as that. It's just. Well, I think it's the best TV show. It's my favorite TV show of all time. I think it's the best TV show I've ever seen. So yeah, that was those. I think Suffer Little Children is probably the one if I had to pick another Deadwood.
And I was going to ask because when you were toying through like some of the ideas of other things that you could have talked about, and you weren't sure you were going to go for Deadwood necessarily, even just for the interest in talking about it. Do you want to pick? And there will be some arbitrariness to go at it again, but an episode of another show that you could have brought to the table here.
I mean, the runner-up was. The immediate runner-up was Buffy season 2 final episode. I still think that's one of my favorite episodes of television of all time.
This is the conclusion. As someone who's still not a huge Buffy fan, but I do know enough to know that's the sort of conclusion if the angel goes bad, and
that's right.
That sort of arc, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It's the conclusion of the angel turning bad season 2 arc, and obviously the final episode of season 2. I rewatched the entire Buffy in the last sort of few months with my daughter, who's now 15, and it was, there were some disappointments along the way, but overall it's still a great 7-season arc of television overall, and that's still my favorite episode. There's some great stuff in season 5, but that's still my favorite episode of Buffy, which means it's one of my favorite episodes of all time. The other one that I might have gone for, if I could have thought about it a bit harder, I think The other one I toyed with, although it would have been a bit of trolling on my part, was the season 1 finale of West Wing. West Wing was a massively important show to me when it came out. I'm terrified to revisit it in the modern era for various obvious reasons relating to the current political situation. But I think that show had some incredible, especially end of season cliffhanger moments. The reason I couldn't really seriously consider the season 1 cliffhanger of the season 1 finale, of West Wing, is that it's kind of 30 minutes of padding to get to the final 10, which is one of my favorite final 10s. It's probably my favorite season finale of anything ever, actually. It's probably even more than the second season of Buffy is the season 1, because it's just the most brutal cliffhanger that anyone's ever done. I think it's just absolutely insane. And similarly, West Wing season 4, the final episode of West Wing season 4 has the president's daughter getting kidnapped, the president having to abdicate under the 25th Amendment because his daughter's been kidnapped, and because of a shenanigans involving his vice president, it means the Speaker of the House is being sworn in instead, and the Speaker of the House is a Republican, and the President's a Democrat, and the Speaker of the House is being played by John Goodman. And he walks in his suit into the Oval Office, and it's fucking fantastic. It's a great moment. They completely screw the pooch on in season 5, but it's a wonderful moment.
As someone who's got this far not watching any West Wing whatsoever, I'm really annoyed when you try and get me to watch it with things like this. Like John Goodman walks in, which I had heard.
Yeah, no, it is the fucking best. It is so, because he's sworn in, he puts his hand on the Bible, and then they all start talking, and they all start saying, "You need to do this. You might want to do this." And he says, "Okay, everybody, I think I'm hearing some good ideas, and I'm certainly willing to take them on board, but I think we need to understand what's just happened." "Yes, sir." And then they just walk out, and he's just left sitting behind the desk in the Oval Office, and you're like, "What the fuck?" So I think God, I'm blanking on his name. Oh, Aaron Sorkin, way better at writing big moments than he is at resolving them. And there's a lot of issues with West Wing, but my God, there's not many people better at writing big moments.
Yeah,
and they,
we Milch, so we got all of that. And
well, this is the thing. I mean, that's the trouble, isn't it? That's the problem with David Milch, is you kind of feel like it's just God tier. It's just God tier writing.
Yeah,
it's not like really got a pro. No, it's not.
No. Well, thanks, Kit, and thanks for joining me for the anniversary. Really pleased, really glad to have you in the fold, and thanks for all the collaborations over the years as well. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, it's an honor to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me, and obviously looking forward to spending 7 hours talking about everything's eventual or night shift somewhere down the line. That'll be glorious.
I would not put it past us.
Oh no, that was a date. I wasn't.
Kit is cocking a gun as we speak.
It was both promise and threat, I assure you.
Yeah. And on that note, see you soon.
Cheers.
You've been listening to the EscapeGoat Podcast, hosted by David Fagiani. If you want to contact the podcast with any feedback or thoughts, you can leave comments on our Libsyn page or under our YouTube videos, or email us at escapegoatpod@gmail.com. You can also reach the show on Twitter on @egoat_pod and follow us for new episode notifications. This podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as our Libsyn site, escapegoatpodcast.libsyn.com. Original intro, outro, and any other incidental music for this podcast is composed, produced, and made available by permission of Richard Gilbert.